While Aegon and his sisters were busy conquering the Stormlands, the Riverlands, the Vale, and what would become the Crownlands, the Iron Islands was in chaos after the fall of Harren the Black, so we'll speak of them later. And the Dornish continued to bide their time, so we'll speak of them later too. The Westeros includes 3 major kingdoms, the North, the West, and the Reach. Torrhen Stark, king of the North, gathered his strength, preparing to march south. It took him longer, so we'll speak of him later. At the same time, the West and the Reach decided to ally and fight the dragons together and gathered their army quickly, so we'll speak of them now. For once, 2 of the kingdoms were united, and this resulted in the largest army ever fielded in Westeros. Aegon, far from fearing this conflict, seems to have almost welcomed it. I mean, he would have preferred they knelt, but this gave him the opportunity to teach a lesson. If Harrenhal was his chance to prove that no castle is safe by destroying the largest one ever built, why not teach the same lesson when it comes to the largest army ever fielded? If the West and Reach were going to gather all that many men in one place, he would gladly come and make an example of them. Teach them why you shouldn't do that. Aegon knew that the biggest army ever seen in Westeros wouldn't fare much better than the biggest castle had. And he was right. It was a spectacular and unique battle, but it wasn't a close battle. But it definitely wasn't simple either. There were many considerations, issues of timing and uncertainty. Aegon had such a huge advantage, compounded by the fact that his enemies were ignorant of how big his advantage was. So he was able to think ahead about the aftermath during the battle. He was able to coordinate the outcome a little bit in ways that you can't normally plan war. It's war like, well, what happens, happens. Like, there's only so much you can plan, right?
It's a little easier to plan when you know you're going to win.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, when you know you're going to
I guess it's a little easier to plan when you know you're going to lose also.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Your choices are smaller anyway. So he could decide who lived and who died on the field of battle in a way that you normally can't. The chaos of war being what it is, you don't have that level of control.
You might want to repeat that last sentence.
Oh. He could decide who lived and who died on the field of battle instead of having to make uncomfortable decisions later, right? He could curtail the outcome in a way that you normally can't. Put a different way, killing on nobles on the battlefield is kingly, while executing them afterwards is that kind of comes off wrong. It looks tyrannical, even if either way you're killing someone who has no chance. That's not really how it's perceived in Westeros. We can argue the similarities to that scenario, but there's no doubt in my mind that it comes off way differently to the other nobles and the peasants, if we're getting into it. So this factor determined much of his strategy, during and after. And arguably, the short period of time after the battle was more compelling than the battle itself. I'll tell you right now that there's a lot unsaid here, which means a lot of our filling in the blanks and reading between the lines is going to happen. So you get to decide yourself which is more interesting. Judge that on your own. We'll give you all the info we can. And either way, it's going to come up quite a few times in A Song of Ice and Fire and Dunk and Egg, meaning the Field of Fire, as a historical anecdote or as a lesson or as a piece of history, something that fits in the world building pretty often. So we'll be bringing all that into the rereadist discussion today as well. Yes, all that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome everybody. Every Sunday, almost every Sunday that is, we get together for a live stream at 3 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Afterwards, you can still see that video on YouTube, but you can catch an edited version up on Spotify or the audio-only version available everywhere that you catch podcasts. And it's ad-free if you join us on Patreon. That's right. Sean, how's it going today? You got a special drink for us today, or for you? You're not sharing it, I assume.
I wish I could. This is a fiery red drink for the Field of Fire.
That is very red.
Maybe for the blood of the dragons as well. This is the Rainbow Machine with Mountain Dew with sparkling ice,
Nice.
Black raspberry. And it's delicious as always.
I doubt it. as always.
I also got this new Mastodon shirt.
Nice. I like that Mastodon
Which
shirt.
I think I'll wear this the next time we do any kind of Hightower centered thing. It's like a torch of green light.
Oh yeah, that is like a Hightower thing. You're right.
Yeah, maybe.
I own several Mastodon shirts, and I'm a big fan of Mastodon, but I don't think I've seen that shirt before. That's cool.
I hadn't either. I snatched it right up. Yeah.
I've got my Mazaria shirt on, nice
Yeah.
and purple for Targaryen eyes and the silver lighting.
By Fox and Brambles,
That's
who
right.
did our logo.
Shout out to Ashton. So, a shout out as well to our good friend Nina. That's Good Queen Alley with 17 L's, and I mean 1 L in Good Queen Alley. Tumblr.com. Very interesting question she was asked, and a very excellent answer she gives to what about Davos being offered the chance to make a shadow baby with Melisandre? What's her deal there? Is she trying to bring him under her power, seduce him, gain his loyalty? It's a really interesting question, and has she offered that to other people? Like, wouldn't there be other people lining up to make shadow babies for their king, given the offer, the context of the offer? So it's a very good question, and Nina gives a really good answer. You're going to want to go over there and read about that. One point she brings up is, well, it becomes an interesting moral conundrum because the center of Davos's morality is loyalty to Stannis, and Melisandre frames it as a deed done for his king. So it's kind of like, well, he did it. Stannis did this. Shouldn't you do it too? Shouldn't you be willing to do the same thing your king is given? It's a really good question and answer. I highly encourage you to read that and think about it yourself too, because it is a tough question.
I think it's another option is that she might have been testing him.
Yes,
it might
absolutely.
not have even worked, but she might have just wanted to know how he would take it. She's sizing him up,
Absolutely, and Nina brings that up too. So you're right to point to that, and Nina caught that as well. All right.
And we talked about this a little ahead of time. I want to point out that I would have been like, heck yeah, for multiple reasons. I
mean, he's in jail.
Jail,
that's the part I bring
sex
up.
Melisandre, take part in a magical spell. Like, it just keeps do it for my king.
What's the downside?
Yeah. Take out our enemy. Yeah. That's the big fail on Davos's part, I'm gonna say.
So ask questions if you have them, whether you're watching live. You can send them right here for Ashea to catch, and we'll put them in the stream, or you can send them to us anywhere that you interact with us. WesteroShistory@gmail.com is one of those places. If you want to find links to everything I ever talk about, whether it's links to our other products, we'll link to Nina, link to Sean's YouTube, links to our other pages, anything like that, go to historyofwesteros.com. That's where all it's stored in one place, as well as Ashea's excellent episode sorter. You can find a version of that there. Lots of things on our website that you will find useful. And at the end of this episode, of course, I'll mention some that are relevant to this one. And I'll give the answer to this trivia question. But one thing I'm going to do a little different with these trivia questions going forward is the answer to this question comes during the episode. Like the answer appears during the episode. So if you're paying close attention, you might catch it. Either way, I'll tell you at the end. And the question is, there were 4 commanders on the field of fire on the side of the 2 kings. So the Reach West side had 4 commanders: the right, the left, the center, and the vanguard. One was King Mern. One was his son Edmund, one was King Loren, and who was the other? So one that was not a king or the son of a king, because it wasn't King Loren's son. The answer comes during the episode, like I said. All right, setup and first mention. I kind of wanted to call this one the Field of Fire and Friendship for Everyone. Because that's because that is basically what happened, right? Everyone either got burned or got peace. They got friendship for everyone, right? It may have been a forced friendship, but it was enforced pretty heavily because, if you didn't stay friends, you got the burn, right? Like, those are your options, and they remained your options even afterwards. So yeah, the Field of Fire comes up quite a lot in A Song of Ice and Fire. It is well remembered, as Aegon surely expected it to be, and as we'll see, it was probably, at least in part, by design, an example to stand the test of time in the vein of Harrenhal. The singers call it the Field of Fire, right? I wonder if it was like a Bloodraven thing where we theorize, or a Tywin thing where we theorize that Tywin encouraged the singing of the Rains of Castamere, or Bloodraven encouraged the singing of A Thousand Eyes in One. Like, Aegon's like, yeah, sing about the Field of Fire, absolutely. Keep that one going. Make sure it's a good song that people keep singing. And it kind of rolls off the tongue, Field of Fire. The Burning of Harrenhal doesn't have a name, doesn't have a nickname. It's just the Burning of Harrenhal, right? It's no fancy, clever nickname for it. This is kind of it is a little poetic, the Field of Fire.
It would have been so much better if it was Baron Hall or something.
Baron Hall, that's really good. I like that. Yeah, that's what it should have been renamed to afterwards. It was built Harrenhal, but it became Baron Hall pretty quickly. Yeah. So that is needed too, because Harrenhal, there's the long-lasting visual evidence. You got that sitting there still now to this day as a testament to the power of the dragon. Well, at least of one dragon in particular, but it works for the others in a lesser sense. So this is remembered more by song and memory and clever naming and things like that, and history books. So there wouldn't be there'd be more of that, right? More, maybe we'll hear a song of it one day. Here's an example, which also happens to be the first ever mention of the Field of Fire, from Tyrion 2, A Game of Thrones.
Tyrion stood in that dank cellar for a long time, staring at Balerion's huge, empty-eyed skull until his torch burned low, trying to grasp the size of the living animal, to imagine how it must have looked when it spread its great black wings and swept across the skies, breathing fire. His own remote ancestor, King Loren of the Rock, had tried to stand against the fire when he joined with King Mern of the Reach to oppose the Targaryen conquest. That was close on 300 years ago, when the Seven Kingdoms were kingdoms and not mere provinces of a greater realm. Between them, the two kings had 600 banners flying, 5,000 mounted knights, and 10 times as many free riders and men-at-arms. Aegon Dragonlord had perhaps a fifth that number, the chroniclers said, and most of those were conscripts from the ranks of the last king he had slain, their loyalties uncertain. The hosts met on the broad plains of the Reach, amidst golden fields of wheat ripe for harvest. When the two kings charged, the Targaryen army shivered and shattered and began to run. For a few moments, the chroniclers wrote, the conquest was at an end, but only for those few moments, before Aegon Targaryen and his sisters joined the battle. It was the only time that Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion were all unleashed at once. The singers called it the Field of Fire. Near 4,000 men had burned that day. Among them, King Mern of the Reach, King Loren had escaped and lived long enough to surrender, pledge his fealty to the Targaryens, and beget a son, for which Tyrion was duly grateful.
Nice, long, excellent, fun quote there. Just goes to show how much of that detail George included really early in the story. That's the 14th chapter of the series. And along with Tyrion, we will be imagining what it must have been like. And it's pretty intense. I mean, think about that. He's just trying to grasp the size of this creature as he's standing looking at its skull and how large its flames must have been and all that. There's been a few examples of dragons on TV. We have an easier time imagining it than Tyrion does, I think, because we've gotten to see dragons on TV that were rendered with really excellent CGI and against armies. That Loot Train episode of season 7 of Game of Thrones is probably our best visual similarity. It was an army of Westermen and Reachmen even, right? Like there were Dothraki at the Field of Fire, so that's pretty different, and there was really only one dragon there that did anything significant. So there's still substantial differences in that battle and this one, but still, it's the visuals there. A lot of those would apply here. So the Field of Fire belongs in the pantheon of early world building. George likely had this stuff written well before he even expanded the series beyond a trilogy, which is why we should be more sure that it matters as a historical analogy / parallel / lesson, or some kind of foreshadowing, or all of the above, because George included it so early and he kept so many of the original details exactly the same. Very detailed numbers. He doesn't usually do that with these historical anecdotes, right? Usually it's more vague, like the armies were large or the host was the largest ever seen. No, he gives us the exact numbers, and those exact numbers are the exact same in Fire and Blood. 600 banners, which is 600 lords, or 600 landed people, like some of them could be knights with castles, same difference. They're both, it's called the Two Kings in capital, right? 5,000 knights with 55,000 total, and 11,000 for Aegon. All those details were the exact same. The only things that I can see that changed were the spelling of Vhagar, because Vhagar used to have an extra H in it, and the calling Aegon Dragonlord, which didn't really stick as a as a nickname, even though it was pretty early in the book, comes up once or twice, then never again. Then it's just Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon Targaryen, Aegon the First, whatever. They just didn't call him that anymore. George just kind of pivoted away from that nickname.
Well, that was kind of my question, is the other times that he was mentioned, like, I got the idea that Tyrion said it like that because he was emphasizing that aspect of Aegon. Like, it almost seemed diminutive of him. Like, he was saying, like, diminishing what he did, like Aegon Dragonlord.
Interesting.
You know, but like, I don't think that is how it's said in the other times it's mentioned like that.
I don't recall exactly the context of the other times it's called Dragonlord. Maybe it's a question for another time, I think. But yeah, it's only a few times. That's a really interesting interpretation of Shay. I like that. And Tyrion is, of all the characters, is someone who's thought about dragons and dragon lords the most. So, and this is our introduction to that. This is literally the chapter where we first find out that he's obsessed with dragons. This is where it comes. This is our introduction to Tyrion's dragonosity.
It would be an interesting, but although maybe difficult thing to analyze the different people. And when they refer to Aegon, what they called him, you know, the context of the conversation or the perspective of the person was, because it is I didn't think about it until Shea said that, but it does make me think that it kind of, he's a dragon lord. Of course he won this big battle. He had a freaking dragon. Like, I guess he's a conqueror, but really he's a dragon lord. It does take away a little bit, you know. He didn't call him Aegon the Wise.
Yeah, if I'm picturing Tyrion narrating that line, there's a little snark in there to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's talking to a little Stark at the time, or he's talking to Jon.
Jon's a little Stark.
Yeah, he's a little Stark. Yeah,
not whole Stark, but I want to point out also that the numbers George gave us aren't preposterously inflated.
No,
like,
you're
they're
right.
Big, but they're not out of control like the Wall or a few other things that he's named.
Yeah, you're right. That might
be with a little regret. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, these armies are not absurdly large. These are reasonable sized. In fact, they would be. This is something we'll talk about a little later. Is the size of the army and how this reflects the population of the era, and how like a similar sized gathering of armies now would probably be larger. Like Renly's army was larger, for example. It just didn't see battle, so it doesn't get. This is the largest army that ever saw a battle, right? As that we know of. There have been other ones that were larger that just were an army but never did any fighting, at least not in that form. So yeah, I like that interpretation as well. If you think back, I mean, they would have been different names he had at the time. Like, when did he start getting called Aegon the Conqueror? Like, right away? Maybe, but he would have maybe had other nicknames, that some of which maybe predated the conquest, and then some of those would have faded, and yeah, different eras might have called him different things, despite the main name.
I suppose, yeah, if you're talking about Joe Biden in the 80s, you might refer to him as Senator Biden because he wasn't president yet.
That's true. Yeah, sure. He might have had different nicknames. Like, no one called him, like, people call him Sleepy Joe now. I don't think anyone called him Sleepy Joe in the 90s, you know? I don't even see that as much of an insult, but whatever. We're not trying to talk about real world politics here. It's like, yeah, people get tired sometimes, whatever. Yeah. But here's a fun...
Pete Holmes bit about
that.
Whenever there's some mean, bully person that's scaring you, just remember, in a few hours, he's going to be, I need the cold side of the pillow. Everyone sleeps. It takes some fear away from the bullies. Yeah.
That's a good point. Even dragons, right? Like, Balerions, just like...
Yeah. A sleeping dragon is still pretty scary.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Just like this snore would knock you off your feet.
It just might accidentally...
Yeah, do they snort little bits of flame, just like little tiny bits pop out, right? Like, just by accident. Here's another fun aspect to that quote. It sounds like Tyrion is down in the cellar looking at the skulls. But if you remember your books, that never happens. He's never down in the cellars looking at the skulls. This is a memory. He's thinking about this time that he was down there. He's actually on his way to the wall. What brings up this memory is he's reading about the properties of dragonbone. He sits down at a tree to read his academic treatise on dragonbone, starts thinking about dragon skulls, and he's taken back to the cellar where he's thinking about that. And that leads him to thinking of the Field of Fire, which is cool because, as I said, this is the introduction to Tyrion being so into dragons. It's basically our first real introduction to any sort of dragon lore. And it's the Field of Fire. That's what we get. The first thing we get is Balerion skull, then a description of the Field of Fire. That's our introduction to dragons in Westeros. Like, Dany's had her first chapter, but she's not really thinking about dragons that much. She's like getting out of the bath and anxious about her wedding, and Viserys is being all crappy to her like he always is. Like, there's not much talk of actual dragons there. So this is where it starts.
It's also a good writing device because it makes the world feel more real.
Yeah.
When characters in the world think about other things, historical events in the world, it makes it seem like the world itself is more real.
I agree.
It's good on so many levels.
Yeah, and George has this great way of, like, you might think, like, a lot of authors would have put this history in Dany's chapters because it's her ancestors. But Tyrion's the one obsessed with dragons. He's the one that's really into it, so he's the one gives us history for that. That's something George does a lot of, where backstory comes in a chapter that applies to a different plot line. And we pointed a lot of that out during the standard Valar reread for A Song of Ice and Fire. And
I pointed this out one time too when we were trying to like categorize, if you will, Martin's writings. It's fantasy, intrigue, horror, but I think mystery as much as any of those.
Ooh, yeah,
and that's one way to present it as a mystery, is to kind of scatter the information, you know?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And speaking of one of the mysteries, it comes up here, the next line, as Tyrion's thinking. It's one of the first examples of the interruption trick that George uses. Of he's in the middle of lore, and rather than finding a spot to end the lore lesson, it gets interrupted by the characters, something that's actually happening that's more pressing or present. Like in this case, Jon says one of the most famous lines in the early books, or if not all the books: "Why do you read so much?" Which is by itself like, oh, we love that question, because Tyrion gives a fantastic answer. It's a beloved answer. And it's the irony in this moment is gigantic, because he's reading about Targaryen history, which probably doesn't apply to Tyrion, but there's a chance it does, because he might be one. But Jon is, right? Like that we can be 99.9% sure of. And so the guy whose lore this applies to, it applies to Dany, who's had one or two chapters by this point, but it also applies to Jon, who's the one interrupting. So that's really neat. And yeah. And Nina points out that the point about Tyrion being duly grateful for the burning there, the outcome of the battle, right? Also, Jon should be duly grateful because Aegon lived long enough to sire a son and become Jon's remote ancestor as well. So both Jon and Tyrion would be grateful if they knew the full story there. All right, so the actual camp, let's bring it back to the timeline of right before the Field of Fire rather than during Jon and Tyrion's walk to the wall. The campaign begins, and here we have another quote of just that.
The two great Western kings had made common cause and assembled their own armies, intent on putting an end to Aegon for good and all. From Highgarden marched Mern IX of House Gardner, king of the Reach, with a mighty host. Beneath the walls of Castle Goldengrove, seat of House Rowan, he met Loren I Lannister, king of the Rock, leading his own host down from the Westerlands. Together, the two kings commanded the mightiest host ever seen in Westeros, an army 55,000 strong, including some 600 lords, great and small, and more than 5,000 mounted knights.
Our iron fist, boasted King Mern.
His 4 sons rode beside him, and both of his young grandsons attended him as squires.
For once, like I said, or we've said a few times, this is an example of kings uniting against a common foe. We don't see it a whole lot. And that, for Aegon, created an opportunity to show that, yes, you bring together all these people, and I will beat it easily, and that will send a message. Ashay is going to put up the map of Golden Grove so we can see roughly the location of this. Now, we don't know exactly where the battle took place. It's somewhere in the general area of near Castle Golden Grove. And perhaps it's a little bit like the Redgrass Field, where it's just a field. It doesn't have a lot of things to market as special. I'm sure in the short term there were things to market, like carnage and bones and pieces of metal. But 300 years later, you can see why maybe the exact location has been lost, like it has been for some other things. Now, to be fair, the Redgrass Field, Bloodraven may have manipulated things a little bit to keep people from knowing where it was, because he saw that people would go there and like leave homages to Daemon Blackfire, and he didn't like that. So he didn't want people like remembering fondly what was and paying their respects like that. So now I'm not sure that was necessarily a problem here. I don't know that Aegon was worried about them paying homage to the dead gardeners, but it's possible. It is possible, and that might be why the site has been somewhat lost. I lean towards it just, it was a big field. Like, there's nothing terribly notable about it other than what took place there, but in the long run, there's no physical reminders. So yeah, comparing this to other large armies for scale, etc., the army size was beaten by Renly. Renly's didn't actually see battle, as I said. Now, all the regions can field larger armies than they used to because of the conquest, because of the longer-term peace, because of lasting peace instead of very frequent war, which was the norm prior to the conquest. So the overall population increased. Farms were larger, farms were more fertile, farms weren't destroyed as often, more trade happened, less disruption of resources like that, less setbacks, less times where half the male population was slain and a bunch of the women too, because of a war. Like, just, yeah, these things these things really stack up.
Investments, long-term plans are more worth making, or it's more safe to decide to build a farm in this area, to lend money to buy, horses and plows and such that they need for a farm, because you don't expect the farm to get attacked by invaders 2 years later, right? Your investment will pay off. The farmer is willing to commit his life to it, to settle down where he is, and et cetera, et cetera. Which, again, more farms means more food, which means, because as populations grow, you need more food too. It's sort of a lot of connecting factors that war disrupts all of,
Every single part of it. Yeah, war. It's the more you study the war, the more disruptive you realize it is to just everything and everyone, even when it's contained to a smaller area, like the spillover factor. Yeah, I mean, just think about it from a vibes perspective, just from like your anxiety, just like sitting around going, when's the next war coming? You just know it's going to happen in the back of your mind. Just like any day now, my whole land could get taken away and just everyone killed, like in the back of my. But under Aegon, you might have a little optimism, like, well, actually, maybe it's been 10 years and we haven't had anything go wrong. Maybe it's too much to hope for that to continue, but maybe it will. And yeah, so like you say, that's the kind of financial investment. You're talking about an emotional investment in your own future and being able to feel like you might have a future, whereas you might not have felt that way under the prior scenarios. Rhaegar had about 40,000 at the Trident, for comparison. The rebels had less, so not a whole lot less than 55,000, but still definitely less. And that was towards the end of the war. There had already been a lot of battles and this like that. Whereas this was the first battle, not for Aegon, obviously, but the first battle that the West or Reach had fought, and the only. So these things were all wrapped up much quicker. Aegon himself would have one of the next most largest armies fielded right after this battle. Basically, all the people that conscripted into his army after he beat them, plus his existing army, added up to about 45,000, which he would take north to confront Torrhen, which we'll be getting to pretty shortly in our read through here. King Mern called it an iron fist, our iron fist, but like, how useful is a fist against a dragon? Not. It's not. It's useless. Like, try punching a dragon, even with a iron fist. Not going to help. It's just going to be annoyed. Like, what?
If you can even reach it, if you're going to land the punch,
can you even get close enough? Exactly. Like, this is a very bad metaphor, Mr. Mern. Fists don't have much range. I mean, it's hard to hit a dragon with an arrow. Like, with a fist? Yeah, good luck. Now, Argilac...
You haven't seen his arms.
He's like Inspector Gadget. Yeah, like... It still doesn't do much damage, though. He's like, hey, stop that. You can tickle him. Like, yeah. Can you tickle a dragon? Argilac had actually come fairly close to winning, or at least it kind of looked like he would. Maybe he wasn't really that close to winning, but he defeated much of the army sent against him before finally losing when his men came in contact with Meraxes and Orys directly. So this might have been learned. The two kings might have heard about this, and that might have given them a boost of confidence. Like, hey, these guys almost won, and we have way more men than them, and we're better. Of course, because they're going to think that anyway, because they're proud. They're Gardeners and Lannisters, and they've ruled these domains for 8,000 years. They've got the level of pride they must have is just we can't fathom. And that's important because to us, it's easy to look at what they did and think, God, that was dumb. So we have to kind of wrap our heads around why to them it didn't seem so dumb. Like, what made them think this would work? What made them think this would be successful? What made them think it was a good idea? Or why did they do it blindly anyway? All these things. There's a lot of questions here. They could think, and this is the start of that, well, Argilac was an old man. We have more men. We have more knights. The way they think about war and the way Mern was so proud, he's like, yeah, we got this iron fist. He's like, the way they think about war, nothing ever like this has ever happened before. From their side, not let alone nothing's ever happened like this with dragons, but they're thinking about their own army and like, we've got the biggest army Westeros has ever seen. More knights than anyone's ever put together. Like, how could we lose? The way they think about war, numbers are a really important thing, especially when you're in the Reach, when numbers are often your path to victory because you have that advantage kind of built in, because that's the population of the Reach is the largest, so it's the advantage they lean on. They're used to that being, and it usually works. It's usually gonna, I mean, yes, smaller armies can beat larger ones. That happens all the time. But I don't think that's what's in their mind here. They're not like, well, maybe he could beat it. That's just not how they're confident.
Also, like, smaller armies beating larger ones, it's like the 17,000 soldier army beat the 22,000
yeah, right,
army.
yeah.
Not the 5,000 soldier army did not beat the 50,000 soldier army. That doesn't happen, right? And
that's what this is, 5 to 1,
factor,
basically. You said 50 to 10. Yeah. This is 55 to 11. It's pretty much the same math.
Yeah. And another factor that normally would be to their advantage is this open field, right? Normally that's something that all the cavalry that they've amassed, all the horses, another thing that when you have more wealth, you have more horses and knights, right? That is an advantage it's hard to take advantage of in the woods.
That's true.
On a coastal area or a cliffside or in the rain. But here we have this open field and a clear day. They don't realize that the same advantages for their cavalry is an advantage for the dragons.
It's a bigger advantage, yes.
For the dragons.
Yeah, they're like, oh, the conditions are perfect, but they're perfecter for the dragons. Yes. And Nina points out something else that I hadn't thought of, which is, given the way these other campaigns went, one dragon per region, the West and the Reach might have thought they were only going to have to face one dragon. So, whoops.
And they might, even if they had to face two, if they don't realize how big and powerful the dragons are.
Yeah.
Because I remember early on when we were discussing this, I thought about the idea of, like, you know, I mean, even now we and maybe Aegon doesn't fully understand the power of a dragon, right?
Yeah.
I mean, George can sort of make it whatever he wants, I guess, but there seem to be certain parameters that we can sort of make sense of, and these characters in this world might have tried to do the same. One reason you have big numbers, dragons aside, is because when that first clash comes, a bunch of people die.
Yes.
And then the next wave, and then the next wave. And so if one army can withstand 3 waves and one can withstand 8 waves, well, the bigger army wins, right? So if the dragon swoops in breathing fire and kills, 300 soldiers, and then it swings around and breathes again and kills 300 more soldiers and swings around, and like, well, how many times can it swing around and do that? Even if we can never hit it with an arrow, even if it's totally impenetrable, we can't get the dragon right, eventually it gets tired, right? And it might kill 7,000-8,000 troops before it gets tired. We still have 30,000 more.
Yeah, what if they wipe out your whole army?
We'll take over. Yeah, like the dragons eventually get tired, the army spreads out. I can still see how they thought they might overcome it.
Yeah, I agree. But, and there's some examples later from the real world that I've got from when we get to the actual battle that also show that there's lots of times in the real world where it looked hopeless and terribly and a terrible idea to fight, and they did anyway and got slaughtered. Like, often it becomes because of an improper framing of a new technological advancement, which isn't a new technological advancement. It's just them not being used to it's new to them, right? The dragons aren't new, but it's new to the Western Reach. So they didn't know. And to be fair as well, no dragon had destroyed an army to this point. Like, Meraxes didn't destroy Orys's army or Argilac's army. That was more of the rain was beating down so hard, Meraxes couldn't take flight. The armies kind of just destroyed each other, slogging it out through the mud until it came to hand, and Meraxes was still really nasty up close without being able to fly. But these combined West and Reach forces had not seen an example of a dragon or multiple dragons destroying a full army yet. They were the example of that, and Aegon was happy to set that example, because it's like, well, if you're gonna try coming at me with an army less than 55,000, like, look how easy this one was. You know, what are you gonna really try 30? You're gonna try 25? Like, what are your chances, man? Like, do you really want to even try? So yeah, that's a hugely important factor, and I think Aegon wanted to make sure that was known. So we pointed out that making that example was a goal for him, but the optics regarding leadership was much different here. Much different. Harren was the big bully on the block and new blood on the block. The Hoare dynasty hadn't been around for 8,000 years as kings. The house probably had been around a long time, maybe even 8,000 years, but they weren't famous Westeros wide for being kings for so long. So, and we know how the country club of Westeros functions, in a sense, in that the older the blood, the more value it seems to have to them. So the Hoares don't have that sort of ancient nobility going for them in the same sense that the Gardeners and Lannisters do. Really, no one had that like the Gardeners. The Gardeners were the tip top of all the qualities that makes noble blood great in Westeros. They had it all. It's the oldest. It's the one that so many other ones descend from. They get to put themselves at the top of that pyramid, and most everyone agrees with them. You know, they even try to claim that Brandon the Builder came from their line. So they've really got an argument for almost everyone. Like, yeah, everyone came from us. So, yeah. And they're popular. That's another factor. Like, the Gardeners had kept stability. They were pretty well regarded. They may not have been, like, popular like the Starks, but they're pretty well regarded, and that counts for a lot. And same with the Lannisters. So it's not like, yay, you took out Harren, we'll gladly join you for that. No one in the Reach flipped to join Aegon ahead of time. No one in the West flipped to join Aegon ahead of time. No one said, you know what, I want to be on the winning side. No, they all stayed loyal. As far as we know, we don't have a single example otherwise. And that is different even in the Stormlands. Like, Argilac had defections before the campaign even began. Before war was even declared. Some of those lords of the Narrow Sea were showing up at Aegon's council meetings and shunning Argilacs. So that by itself shows an example of the level of loyalty that was in play here and why the political situation was much different. You can't just take out these kings and expect everyone to fall in line. Well, you kind of can, but you have to do it right.
Depends on the nature of how you take them.
Right, you have to take them all out, which is what he did. Right, if you could leave one or two Gardeners, then they might try to rally around that one Gardener and be like, "Well, this is the family that's led us for 8,000 years. We're going to stick with them." But what happens when there's no Gardeners left, or only female Gardeners left, as we'll get to, because there had to be some. They don't get mentioned, so that's a problem. But we'll that's some of the reading between the lines we have to do. But we'll get to that in the second half. So that's why he would have just preferred them to bend the knee, because they already have this love and this following. If they bend the knee to him, then everyone else follows suit, right? And they're like, okay, well, if the Gardeners bend the knee, then so will we. And then it's nice and smooth and clean, and no one dies, no fields get burned. But of course, that's not what happened. The submission would have to take war to determine. Nina writes that Aegon's decision with the Field of Fire is interesting from a geopolitical perspective, because he's setting out with the intent to, if not have them bend the knee, then to annihilate them. They either can bend the knee or die. The two most ancient and well-established dynasties in Westeros. Aegon had every reason to expect that, with Mern and Loren personally leading the armies, which would have really rung bells in his mind, like, oh, they're both leading the armies. Well, that gives me a chance to kill them on the field of battle rather than to execute them or to do something more unsavory later, let alone like what Visenya will say about Casterly Rock later. Like, ooh, I'm glad they bent the knee. I don't want to have to deal with that castle. Woo. So, yeah, that might have gotten ugly, in other words, and that's not what Aegon wanted. He didn't want to show that this castle would slow him down, and wanted to just dominate. These weren't violent tyrants who were unpopular. These weren't brutes who had enslaved people. These were not followers of some dark religion that most of Westeros thought of as like demons. Like, of course, I'm referring to the drowned god. No, these are people who not only worship the Seven, like most of Westeros, but are considered pretty high up in regard And in terms of like hierarchy, like the Gardeners and the High Towers, of course, have kind of a lockdown on the Faith of the Seven in terms of having a lot of indirect soft power, even a little bit of hard power over the Faith. Now, of course, as we discussed in our Under the Dragons episode, the High Towers didn't show up to the Field of Fire, and that's a pretty big deal and a big separate discussion. But it wouldn't have helped if they had. I don't like, 10,000 more men? Well, that wouldn't have made any difference. Like, right? No. Please. No. They made the right call. And
I will say the way it might have helped if they had deployed 10,000 men somewhere else.
Okay.
If they sent 10,000 men to the Crown Lands or whatever,
That's a good point. If they rather than just,
I don't know if they would have been smart enough to do that if they did show up, but that's the way it could have made a difference.
I agree. Yeah, if they had done it, if they had deployed their men differently, this is the worst thing they could have done. Putting them all in one place where the fire can get them easily is As we see in the Dance of the Dragons, no one does this. No one forms huge-ass armies and takes them to the field because everyone knows by that era it's a terrible idea when there's dragons about. The era of large armies returns when the dragons are gone, right? The big armies that like go into Dorne to conquer Dorne in the era of King Daeron the First. That's getting back into the size armies that existed prior to the dragons. Like once the word got out, you don't put 30, 40,000 men in the field when they could all just get cooked. It's just a terrible idea. You go smaller. You go 5,000 here, 3,000 here, 8,000 here, maybe even smaller, and scatter. Don't be all in one place because there's only so many dragons. And that's even more true now than it is during the dance when there's actually quite a few dragons. But so if they had used a strategy like that, it would have given Aegon fits. The strategy that Dorne does use does give them fits and ends up working pretty darn well. It's still very destructive, but it was a path to victory, and it worked. It may have been the only path to victory, but it's not one that was perceived by either the West or the Reach, at least not by people in power, not by people in charge. So, really, really different. So Aegon has to play it delicately. He either has to wipe them out so that there's no rallying behind the survivors, or he has to beat them so convincingly that they bend the knee and then the rest fall, or who knows? It could end up being like what Dorne becomes, which is Aegon probably perceived that was possible for any of these particular regions, maybe some more than others. Maybe the people of the Reach just don't have it in them to behave like the Dornish, but still, Aegon doesn't necessarily know that for sure. He wouldn't want to take any chances necessarily. So, let's see here. So, go ahead, Sean.
I can make a quick comment too, just thinking about the idea of how unprepared they were, how they just didn't understand what they needed to do in this scenario. It's not, different reasons might be a little bit of naivete, a little bit of pride, a little bit of, lack of planning. And you got to wonder too, if in all the scores of people involved in the leadership, there might have been a few guys in there I was like, I don't know about this. I know about those dragons. Like, maybe we should spread, but maybe they weren't senior or influential enough, or they were looked at as cowardly but in World War, and I'm pretty sure in World War II, that there was when the Germans were just coming across France, and France just wasn't used to the rate that the tanks and planes were. Plus, the Germans were like on methamphetamines going through the night and stuff. They were just progressing faster than anyone guessed, and eventually they promoted up this young. He might have been a colonel, but they put him in charge of the whole army. This young guy that said, "Look, I know how to handle this." All these old generals from the old days, literally riding horses, they just don't understand. I've got a plan. And they're like, all right, after all those generals failed, they put him in charge, and he died in a car accident, and his plans were lost.
What?
Germany took over.
I didn't know about that. I knew about everything, all that lead up. I knew about the fact that France was they were my perfect example of just not adapting to modern warfare. You got machine guns now, which were new, and France kept doing old style charges into machine gun fire, and just tens of thousands of soldiers would get mowed down. This is World War I. I know part of you.
That was World War I.
Yeah, you're talking about World War II, some of it. But same difference. And it's like, what are you doing? Don't just charge machine guns. Stop it.
And to be fair, the Germans were doing it too. Yeah. Everyone was doing it. No one was adjusting. Yeah.
So when you all are like
despicable casualties,
if you think about this as being unrealistic, like why would they charge dragon? No, it's completely supported by real war, examples of real war, even relatively recent. That's only 100 years ago. or 110. Yeah. So people do war. People do.
It just takes a
bad
few
strategies.
naive, stubborn people in charge of thousands of people in the army to give them some bad orders, and then a bunch of people who are trying to be loyal and do what they're told do it, and then it gets everyone killed.
Yeah. Did you remember the movie Kingdom of Heaven?
Vaguely,
Orlando Bloom.
I remember that it had a bunch of Game of Thrones stars.
It did. It had quite a few. It featured, like after the Crusades, and it featured one of the important characters was a knight who sworn to the king, and they all marched into the desert to confront Saladin. And he's like, one of the guys is like, "Why are you doing that? You're going into the desert where they're like, it's like their home field advantage. This is stupid." And he's like, "Yeah, it's stupid, but I follow the king. Like, you don't disobey your king, like, period." And then, like, next, half an hour later, he finds his head. He's like, "Oh, well, that guy's dead now." And, like, he followed his king into absolute foolish death, but that's what they do. Yeah, it's hard to wrap our modern heads around that level of loyalty. And sometimes, like, maybe some of you can do it, but I have a hard time with that. But it's real. It's very real. So it's real, and I have no trouble thinking of it in terms of Westeros.
I have more trouble thinking of it in terms of stupid humans.
Yeah. Shout out, speaking of not stupid humans, our good friend TKOK Podcast Network, that's Tommy Pappas, sends a super chat, says, "Love y'all." Well, we love you too, buddy. Yeah, thanks for the love, and let's keep at it here. Let's talk our next moment here in the preparation for the battle on the march. Here's a quote.
"The two kings did not linger long at Golden Grove. A host of such size must remain on the march, lest they eat the surrounding countryside bare. The allies set out at once, marching north by northeast through tall grasses and golden fields of wheat."
That is another reason why large armies are rarer, because of the amount of food they require all in one place, where distribution and logistics become a big issue. Once again,
also, they gotta poop.
Yeah.
It's easy to overlook that, but I'm telling you, it's a real thing. It's got to be dealt with. 50,000 people.
Well,
that's a lot of poop.
It's more people than that too, right, Sean? This is 55,000 soldiers. How many soldiers, other people?
Be a certain accompanying, armors and cooks and everything else.
Like Drogo's Khalasar is 100,000 people. That's another good example. 40,000 of them are warriors, is what we're told. So.
Yeah.
And that's like a really high percentage.
Culture,
yeah.
They wouldn't have as much of support. I guess all the family and the kids are coming. That's probably not happening with this Westerosi army.
Right. Some families come, but not too many. Like there's camp followers and people that don't have a place to live, and children that are born on the march, and cooks and grooms and squires. The squires might be counted as part of the army. That's a gray area. But anyway, Renly's huge host is one of our best examples, again, because we actually see this, and we see how they have to keep moving because of the same reason. You can't just take 100,000 people around and stay in one place. Like, if you've ever been to, like, a music festival, you can, that's
a great example.
Like, how could you possibly, like, that, all the food that gets consumed, like the concessions, and once again, and how full the porta potties get, Sean, to your point, like, it's disgusting.
Just think about how long it would take to fill up 50,000 water bottles. Just think about the logistics of that. And they're going to use more than one water bottle a day of water.
When it's that hot, yeah.
And you got to keep doing it day after day. It's a huge thing that you get so overlooked, what it takes to move around an army like that.
Here is the next quote, which refers to Aegon hearing about what's going on and his own counter move.
Advised of their coming in his camp beside the God's Eye, Aegon gathered his own strength and advanced to meet these new foes. He commanded only a fifth as many men as the two kings, and much of his strength was made up of men sworn to the Riverlords, whose loyalty to House Targaryen was of recent vintage and untested. With the smaller host, however, Aegon was able to move much more quickly than his foes. At the town of Stony Sept, both his queens joined him with their dragons. Rhaenys from Storm's End and Visenya from Cracklaw Point, where she had accepted many fervent pledges of fealty from the local lords. Together, the three Targaryens watched from the sky as Aegon's army crossed the headwaters of Blackwater Rush and raced south.
We discussed Visenya at Cracklaw Point in our last episode. or in our last regular episode. And of course, we discussed Rhaenys at Storm's End in our patrons and supporters episode of the Battle of Last Storm. Aegon clearly wanted to move fast, and he knew he needed all 3 dragons. This is some contact clearly happened. He sent letters, probably by Raven, to his sisters, maybe by horse messenger, since there might not have been inside castles that could be reached at the time. But one way or another, the messages were sent. He probably already knew about King Torrhen. He probably wanted to defeat the host of West and Reach before King Torrhen, and maybe wanted to avoid the potential of it becoming an alliance of 3 kings. Because if it does become multiple foes allied against him, then they might kind of find themselves just naturally going to the strategy that you discussed, Sean, which is attacking multiple targets, going to different places, and starting more of a traditional campaign where you attack each other's lands and bring castles back over from one side to another. This was, of course, not a very traditional campaign to this point, and that is a big part of why Westeros did so poorly against the Targaryens, because their strategies were bad. They were very bad. Very bad. Very bad. Bad. And Aegon seemed to have known that they would use bad strategies, which made his strategies even more dominating. He had superior military power and superior strategy. So really, like I said, it's not the outcomes of these battles or the actual battles themselves that makes this stuff interesting. It's the before and after. Let's talk about how they set up before the battle. I call this playing the field. Here's the first quote.
The 2 armies came together amongst a wide, open plains south of the Blackwater, near to where the Gold Road would one day run. 2 kings rejoiced when their scouts returned to them and reported Targaryen numbers and dispositions. They had 5 men for every one of Aegon's, it seemed, and the disparity in lords and knights was even greater. And the land was wide and open, all grass and wheat as far as the eye could see. Ideal for heavy horse.
That's what you were saying earlier, Sean, how they were like, man, it's all coming up. 2 kings. So we've got our map up. Shout out to Michael Klarfeld for this great map that we always use. Shay's got this area kind of shaded in gold. This is roughly the area we're talking about. We don't know exactly where the battle was fought, like I said, but it's generally in this area. As you can see, not that far from Stony Sept. You can see that up just north of where the Gold Road is. The Gold Road is on the map, but as the quote reminds us, the Gold Road did not exist at this point. And there is not that far. We're not that far from King's Landing. We're not that far from a lot of other notable spots. You can see Golden Grove there to the southwest where the 2 kings first met. And you can see the God's Eye. So not super far from Harrenhal. And this is, like I said, if more time had come or more time had elapsed, it may have been that the Stark army could have moved south and merged with the army of the West and Reach, which might have actually given Aegon some trouble, especially if they were coming from multiple directions or things like that. Yeah. Wouldn't have marched so cleanly into a trap if it had gone that way, but effectively they did march into a trap.
That's another thing I wonder about too. We talk about Aegon's different sorts of superiority that he had. He would have had superior intelligence. The dragons flying around in the sky could see those armies forming up.
That's true.
Weeks in advance and know the general direction that they were coming from. And I bet he coordinated. It wasn't a coincidence, I don't think, that this battle happened at this field. I think that he knew that would be where they would think they had an advantage, and he knew
they didn't.
They would.
It's like actually they're wrong. That's a great point, Sean. Yeah, he knew what type of ground they'd be looking for. And he was all happy to let them have it. So I think you're right that he may have.
He knows
kind
like
of
the general direction they're coming from, where the armies are forming up, what roads they would take, and the direction they're coming. All right, what in the middle is ideal
on that route? Where should we? Yeah, I like that a lot.
And I wouldn't even be surprised if they lured the scouts to that spot purposefully.
Or maybe he conferred with the Lord of Stony Sept or some other local lords there, and who knew the region, were like, oh, this is where you're going to want to let them go. Like, you're trying to trap them in a big open field that they think is going to help them. Here's the spot. We'll show you, And
it goes back to my thought of him like bringing map bakers back to King's Landing. or Dragonstone or whatever, like those same map makers would have so much insights for them, and they would gain so much more insights by getting to fly in a dragon just one time. Like,
I swear, Sean, the first time you said map maker, you said map baker is what I heard. And I'm like picturing like they
it's like hot pies designing maps out of bread.
Ooh.
I would eat that. Half the map's been eaten. We don't know.
Oh, no.
Damn it, don't make maps out of bread. That's foolish. Yeah, Nina wonders if there were any residual effects on the area afterwards, like the way that in Dorne we hear that some of the burnings were so severe that sands turned glass in some spots. I don't know if that would be quite that bad here, but you might have some semi-permanent or at least long-lasting, something that like remained for a century afterwards. Very possible, like minor level fallout. You know, the heat could have been so intense that I don't know. Yeah, who knows? Who knows what the effects of Dragonfire are long term? But I could see it being more than just a generation or so.
Worth noting that the dragons in the Field of Fire might not have had to get so close and burn so hot. They just set the grass all around them on fire. You know. That's
true. It's not the actual dragon flame burning them; it's the burning field. Yeah. But some of them did.
Sure, you get a little both.
Yeah, some of them got the actual scorching. Now, you wonder, too, if, like he said, they found this spot. They were like, oh, look, they have less men. Was this partly bait? Was it like, we put our guys in a spot we knew they would love to fight us. They would be drawn to this area. But we also know that it's going to be like a hot box that we can contain them. And maybe they kept their dragons a little back. Remember, we alluded earlier to the fact that maybe they thought they were only going to face one dragon. So maybe they even concealed even all of them. And so they were like, we saw the army, but we didn't see the dragons. Maybe now's our chance. The dragons aren't here. Maybe there's one here. Yeah. We don't see it. So maybe they were things to increase their overconfidence. Like Aegon's like, yeah, let's let them feel confident. Let's let them feel overconfident. Let's boost their overconfidence. Just to make sure they keep blundering headlong into this trap we've set for them. Now, don't give them any reason to rethink things. Give them reasons to confirm what they already believe.
Because that wasn't, according to what we're getting, from the source material, that wasn't part of the reports the scouts bring back, right? Like,
there's no mention of the dragons.
5-1.
Yeah.
And we have even more horses and cavalry. No mention of
dragons. No mention. I know, that's peculiar, isn't it? Like, maybe that's just a given, but like you would still, like, well, which dragon is it? Is it 3? Is it 1? Yeah, that you would think that would matter, but no, that's not mentioned. So that's peculiar and maybe speaks to a little bit of cunning on Aegon's part, a little bit of trappiness, which they may not have wanted to emphasize afterwards because they wanted to show just, we took them on head on and beat them, and that was it. There was we don't want to point out the tricks, because tricks, you can't rule through trickery. Strength is something you can rely on to hold a realm. You can't keep tricking people into holding the throne. And here's where I suspect there's some other history, some books were involved. Aegon is, I don't know that he was bookish, but he wasn't like a jock that didn't like reading, for lack of a better term for Westeros. I feel like he was pretty well educated, and between him and his sisters, there's probably a lot of education, probably a lot of reading, probably Valyrian freehold war treatises and manuals, like what thousands of years of dragon lords had written down about how to use a dragon in battle, how to use a dragon against a standing army, how to use a dragon against cavalry, how to use a dragon when there's fields of wheat around. Like, Aegon may not have invented this tactic. He may not have just improvised this. I strongly suspect this has been written about in past texts, and Aegon may have gotten the idea from that. Maybe he came up with it on his own. Maybe Visenya came up with the idea. But I suspect this wasn't new. It was new to Westeros, but we got literally thousands of years of Valyrian conquests that we don't know much of anything about. And there's probably plenty of strategy written about best use of dragons in war and best uses of keeping men all, like the Mongols had this. The Mongols had these very, not complex, but experienced from positions of experience, from long years of war, of knowing how people retreat, knowing how the patterns, like it's like fluid dynamics, like the way people run, the way they'll run away, and the Mongols would understand how to guide that. They would chase them a certain way to lead them to a style of retreat they could capitalize on. Like Fear is something you can understand and predict in large groups. You might not understand how a particular individual react to fear, but when it's 40, 50, 80,000 people, you know crowd dynamics, mob dynamics, how a riot might play out. And there's thousands of years of Valyrian experience with this sort of thing that I think Aegon and Visenya Rhaenys probably had to draw on if they so chose. And I suspect that's in play here.
There were only, 50 years of flight existing in World War II, and we came up with firebombing.
Yeah, right.
We didn't have a long time to come up with that, and we did. So
imagine if we had that long, it would have been maybe more precise, or I don't know, might have been pretty similar, but the idea wasn't new, or wouldn't have been new. So yeah, so either way, it's easy to think of it's a natural enough idea that you can imagine him coming up with it on his own, but you can also imagine it being something that had been written about in a variety of ways over the preceding eons. Anyway, here is our next quote.
Aegon Targaryen would not command the high ground, as Orys Baratheon had at the last storm. The ground was firm, not muddy. Nor would they be troubled by rain. The day was cloudless, though windy. There had been no rain for more than a fortnight.
Pretty perfect, and the exact opposite of the last storm. In other words, the rain can be a big disadvantage for the dragons, and the dryness can be a big advantage. So yes, indeed. That's something for us to keep an eye out for in A Song of Ice and Fire, by the way. Just as there's potential for a muddy battle in the Stormlands again, with the Golden Company and maybe other things, there's a potential for large-scale battle like this in the Reach or in the West. Something like the Loot Train battle, vaguely like it, could happen from the TV show. The Reach in the West versus an army with dragons, Dany's dragons won't be as devastating as these, but Dany's army will be larger, presumably. It could have Dothraki and Unsullied, so there is that. So it won't be the exact same thing. It won't be history repeating itself exactly, but there will be some elements that we could probably draw comparisons to that will be pretty strong. And we'll just have to wait and see. Either way, it teaches us to think about terrain and weather when we're thinking about dragons and the way that they can be helped or hurt even more so than the men on the ground and the horses. Here's our next quote, taking us into the preparations for the beginning of the battle.
King Mern had brought half again as many men to the battle as King Lorne, and so demanded the honor of commanding the center. His son and heir Edmund was given the vanguard. King Lorne and his knights would form the right. Lord Oakenheart the left. With no natural barriers to anchor the Targaryen line, the two kings meant to sweep around
Sean,
Aegon.
Will you say Lord Oakenheart?
Oh, did I say Oakenheart?
Yes,
I
please,
said
thanks.
Oakenheart.
I'll just edit it.
Let's see. King Lorne and his knights would form the right. Lord Oakenheart the left. With no natural barriers to anchor the Targaryen line, the two kings meant to sweep around Aegon on both flanks, then take him in the rear with their iron fist. A great wedge of armored knights and high lords smashed through Aegon's center.
Oh, that's a little suggestive.
Can you see why
fist him in the rear?
Can you see why I did? Sometimes you can tell which quotes I'm gonna give to Sean because I don't think I can possibly.
Because I don't have a dirty mind.
Yeah,
I would not have made it through that.
I would never have made it through that quote. I was grinning, listening to Sean read it as he talked about taking him in the rear and the iron, and especially because Sean said with their iron fists.
This is wedge. Yeah, just wedge it right in there, right in his rear.
God.
Oh boy.
Real everything everywhere all at once moment.
Yeah. So the center and the vanguard, both for House Gardner. That's really like all the honor and all the doom. Like you just put your son and heir right in the vanguard, charge right down Balerion's gullet. Real didn't work out so well. I suspect Edmund was the first to go of these because he was in the vanguard. Like that makes sense, So. And I suspect that the High Towers might have had control of one of those if they were there, because they would have been a higher rank, yeah. But that's not what happened. So later on, as I was alluding to, they would probably learn. One day it might have dawned on them, maybe the day after, maybe during, that this was the worst possible strategy they could have used. Put everyone together and charge. That's the worst idea. To them, it's the best idea because it's the thing that defines chivalry. Like you get together, you charge, and you see who's stronger. But in this case, it was horrible thinking. Nope, not good at all. And but these guys have just this is how they've done war for countless generations. They don't know anything else. Yeah, encirclement strategy is very straightforward, very common, very normal. Aegon probably saw it coming. He's like, yeah, they're gonna try to stick their fist in my rear. So let's see them do that when I'm way up in the air. Like, how are they gonna? So
if there hadn't been dragons, or even if there had been one small dragon, and Aegon's army was 3 times as big, it might have worked.
Yeah,
it might have still
worked.
You know?
Yeah. Aegon's here's an interesting perspective to consider here. Aegon's allies. We got like Lord Mooten and Lord Darklyn and these other guys who were in his army. They probably just shaking their heads like, oh, these Reach and Westermen, they're just because they had learned their lesson, a few weeks before. So now they're in the know. They're like, oh yeah. Yeah, we've only got 5 times fewer men than you, but they probably felt confident too. Like, they'd seen Balerion in action, and they hadn't seen all 3 dragons in action. It's like, wow, all 3, we're going to see a sight. This is going to be a spectacle that they are going to tell their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. And they would be confident that they'd live to have great-grandchildren because they would feel confident they were going to win this day because they saw this army making the mistakes that they made when they faced Aegon and how badly it went for them. And they're like, well, at least we survived to see this and to be on the right side of this. And yeah.
Think about some other factors for Aegon and everyone involved, how well this would have gone. These troops in his army now, it's both sort of a test of their loyalty and their bravery. Hey, I want you 5,000 to face these 50,000. Right?
Yeah,
Aegon's
good point.
You're going to do this, right? And then also it's a chance for them to gain glory. They are all going to come away as the winners of this battle. We were outnumbered.
We beat the West and the Reach. Like all of them. Yeah, so you're right. They got
it gives a lot of glory to his army. It tests their loyalty to him. It gives him a chance to show off the power of the dragons. It was such a win, and for Aegon at least, other than maybe his, his psyche or his moral dilemma of slaughtering all these people in war. But other than that, it's a win in almost every way.
Yeah, like a lot of those folks, a lot of the veterans of the Field of Fire, even if you're on the losing side and survived, but even more so if you're on the winning side in the short term, you probably never paid for your own drinks, if you were at a bar, you're like, let me tell you of the day, and everybody's like, oh, this guy was at the Field of Fire? Shut up, everybody shut up.
Well, I guess you talking about like Aegon's psyche makes me wonder. I also wonder how up close and personal these lords would have been with those horrors. Like, like when they lay in bed trying to sleep, do they smell burning flesh, or were they kind of removed from it a little bit? I feel like they might
the screams of the
that's a pretty brutal. Like war in general is awful, but I feel like that would be a particularly memorable sight because of all of the senses that it would be really
the smells would be awful too. You're right, the sights would be awful, the sounds would be awful, the smell, you're right, just terrible.
So like if you saw it, I don't you're telling your grandkids, but maybe you're like you tell your grandkids and then you retire to bed to cry.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We can some people might not want to tell the story.
Yeah, they're like, no, I will not tell that story. Yeah,
I don't care about a free drink, I just want to get past that memory.
I don't want to think about it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we shouldn't over glorify it because you're right, there would be the other end where people are just like, no, I want to think about that as little as possible because I think about it all the time when I'm sleeping, and that's enough. That's more than enough. And yeah, to bring back visuals, we got some visuals of this from that Loot Train battle episode. The aftermath was pretty nasty. Like Jaime looking around, Tyrion looking around, like especially Tyrion wandering the battlefield afterwards, like because he started to feel responsible for. He's like, what? Like I'm partly responsible for this. Which, by the way, we have a quote later of that Tyrion feeling responsible for a lot of carnage, so it kind of comes back around. So we might be getting something like that in the books. Tyrion or maybe Dany or someone like looking on this and be like, wow, this isn't really what I had in mind. This is not what I wanted. But there could also be in House of the Dragon. We might see some carnage and aftermath that gives us other looks besides that one. So we might have multiple views. I can't wait to see all the carnage and burned bodies. And
I have a thought that I was going to work in later on, but it's pretty relevant now. Is it could have been worse. It's something that I think that if Aegon, if this is Maegor, he wouldn't have burned a strife through the Vanguard.
Yeah.
he would have just burned a circle around the army, and all 50,000 of them would have just been engulfed and flamed and died. All the oxygen would have burned up, and he could have just murdered everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? He just did enough to like, the battle's over now, right?
Yeah,
like
Aegon was more
enough,
precise.
Right?
Yeah, he was trying to not kill all the troops. He was trying to kill the leadership and leave the troops alone as much as possible. So yeah, here is what Aegon actually did. Here's his battle preparations quote.
Aegon Targaryen drew his own men up in a rough crescent, bristling with spears and pikes, with archers and crossbowmen just behind, and light cavalry on either flank. He gave command of his host to Jon Mooten, Lord of Maidenpool, one of the first foes to come over to his cause. The king himself intended to do his fighting from the sky, beside his queens. Aegon had noted the absence of rain as well. The grass and wheat that surrounded the armies was tall and ripe for harvest, and very dry.
The plan as well ripens. Yes, the army of the two kings was walking right into a fire trap, basically. That's what we can kind of gather from this. Even if you didn't already know it was coming, I think that would be pretty clear. Nina wonders if maybe something we alluded to before, that we started bringing up in terms of the scouts not talking about the dragons, or just mentioning the 11,000 men, is maybe the dragons were kept hidden, or at least a little bit off site, just to maybe keep them under wraps a bit, maybe so the Gardeners and Lannisters didn't know exactly what they were going to face, maybe to boost that false confidence. Aegon's like, yeah, they've got this false confidence, let's increase that even more, and the best way to that is not let them see the dragons, because the dragons will scare them. If they see them, they'll be like, oh my god, what have we done? But if we keep that concealed till the last minute, then the plan will work optimally, which it did. So there is, on one hand, you can read this like, man, things just worked out so well for Aegon. Like, they just walked right into his trap. It was really dumb of them. But on the other hand, I think there's plenty of circumstantial evidence or the suggestion of Aegon doing things to make them do this, to like increase the odds of them falling into this trap, to encourage them to make this mistake. It wasn't just a full-on blundering exactly the right way. It was, some of this was coached, I think, or encouraged, or coerced, or whatever. Pick your synonym, one or the other. Let's take a quick break, roughly halfway through the episode here. When we come back, we'll get to the actual action, then the aftermath, then all the fun quotes and references that come during A Song of Ice and Fire and Dunk and Egg, referring to the Field of Fire, to show how the legend lingers, to show the lesson that Aegon taught and how it held. This episode is brought to you by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com/50Westeros and use the code 50Westeros for 50% off plus free shipping. Even though the fall can feel jam-packed, there's lots of holidays, end of the year stuff, things you're trying to get done that maybe you put off. HelloFresh gives you an option that lets you move quicker. We've pitched before the fun of being in the kitchen with your loved one or loved ones and spending that time together, preparing a meal together. But let's be honest, you don't always have that kind of time. So it's nice to have an option to do something a little faster. So HelloFresh's quick and easy options, including their 15-minute meals. That's less time than it takes to get delivery, less time than it takes to run out for fast food, or about the same maybe, and way healthier and way tastier. So everything's pre-portioned. You're already going to have it in your fridge. It's a no-brainer. HelloFresh Market has add-ons as well. You can enjoy desserts like apple cider cake. That sounds awesome, with caramel sauce. Barbecue pulled pork nachos. Damn, I need to take a break and eat some of that right now. Or mini pumpkin cheesecake. Lots of different options there. Personally, I enjoyed the pepita crushed salmon. We had that a couple weeks back. That was super good. It had these really excellent sides. There were these crispy bread pieces and this awesome salad with full of feta and these great tomatoes. Just everything was really good. It was crispy. And I love a good salad, so that was nice. I love salmon too, so it was pretty perfect all around. So once again, go to HelloFresh.com/Westeros or /50Westeros, pardon me, and use the code 50Westeros for 50% off. It is America's #1 meal kit. So head over there today, use that discount code, get yourself healthy and fast free meals, or not free, discounted meals, get healthier and enjoy that delivery and that speed. Yeah.
50% off is no joke either.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, that really is a lot. So I'm glad they have the options of you can do the slower meals, like longer preparation and take your time, or the fast ones. That's one of the things I brought up when we started repitching HelloFresh was the changes they've made over the years to scale and to give you more options, and I really appreciate that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore. You get to scale it to you rather than you scaling to them, which that's a big leap forward, I think. So yeah. Happy to see that. Happy to pitch them. Happy to have them as a sponsor.
We also have a bunch of individual sponsors, all of our patrons. And one thing that we do for them is give them nicknames, give them history or, Westeros, Martin World inspired names. You could pick your own name too. If you're a patron and you don't have a name, let us know. We'll make you a name. And I just wanted to give a shout out. We used to do this on a podcast more regularly, but we would shout out some of the names of some of our patrons. So one of our very first 3 or 4 we ever had was Archmaester John the Just. Also Sir Rambo, Knight of House Gannon, First Blood. I like incorporating some other fandoms into the names. Lord Commander George the Golden is on the Beer Guard in my honor.
You weren't biased at all when you chose that name.
No, not at all. He's also one of the earliest ones. I was trying to do some newer ones, some older ones, spread the love around.
We've met George in person at Con.
Yeah. He put some freaking armor on him. He could definitely be my real world beer guard. He's a big dude.
Nice.
Maester Ali, who was lost and found in scrolls.
Nice.
Sir Billy Roddy, Knight of the North and Breaker of Horses. And Red Priestess Ellie, I hope I say this right, Ellie Alika.
Ellie Alika, yeah. It's actually in the spreadsheet.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on. So Sean picked a few that he just liked. He's decided he wants to just highlight some random patron names here and there, and I think it's cool. Yeah, some of these names haven't been said in a while. Occasionally, some of them are said during scripted episodes, which still contain the full list of patrons based on our different tiers and which gets shouted out. That's cool. Thanks for that, Sean. Also, Herb Thompson asks, real-life history, there's a ton of battles where the vastly outnumbered armies won. Alexander versus the Achaemenids, Battle of Agincourt. Yeah, there are a lot of examples of that. Usually it's because of some advantage that is not cited. Like here, of course, dragons are the advantage that is it's a very clear advantage in this case. Alexander, his was superior strategy. He charged right at Darius. Darius ran away, but it wasn't as simple as charging right at him. It was, he moved his army, he moved his cavalry that he led along the front lines towards one side, towards his own right, if I remember correctly. And Darius sent a screen to follow him, to kind of match him. And it wasn't a horse screen. It was kind of like, it was a bunch of skirmishers and javelin throwers. And then Alexander, if you can watch my hands, he just kind of cut back and charged back. They were following him this way. Then he just kind of pivoted back in front of them and charged right through that gap. And right at Darius ran away, and his army ran away with him. Your king runs away, the army runs with it. Yeah. The other advantage was that Alexander's armies were not conscripts, and the Persians were basically slave soldiers, and they were like, we don't want to be here. We're not here out of loyalty. We're here because we'll be killed if we're not. Whereas Alexander's men were like, we're following this guy because he's amazing. Well, I mean, they kind of had to too, but it wasn't slavery. So Battle of Agincourt, good example. That's also a technology thing. Longbows strategy was the French did not adapt to these longbows being shot at them, and they just kept charging right into it, and there was mud and all this other stuff. Yeah.
I also should say that I maybe overstated it. It's not like never does the 5,000 army beat the 50,000 army, but it's so rare that we take note when it happens. It is the weird, rare thing. There might be a bunch of examples of it, but there are probably literally 1,000 times many more examples of when it went the other way.
These battles you're right. These battles are historically significant in part because the smaller force beat the larger force, and they're analyzed because of that. Like the Battle of Cannae or Carrhae in Rome, when Hannibal encircled a larger force with a smaller force. That's like, whoa, that's incredible. But it's an amazing generalship that accomplished that, that stuff like that. Another example from Lolotov, reminds me of the Mongols versus gigantic armies with expeditionary forces. Yeah, Subutai was sent with 30,000 Mongols, and he to scout the West and scout Europe and go through all that area. And yeah, he built.
And instead, he took over Europe.
Yeah, he essentially he conquered like half of Europe with an expeditionary force. The Mongols were just vastly superior in on the battlefield and with logistics and these other things. Yeah, so very good examples. Very good example. If they had dragons, it would have been even more one-sided, even with their lack of men. So here is the actual quotes from the Field of Fire itself. Let's have it.
The Targaryens waited until the two kings sounded their trumpets and started forward beneath a sea of banners. King Mern himself led the charge against the center on his golden stallion, his son Gawain beside him with his banner, a great green hand upon a field of white. Roaring and screaming, urged on by horns and drums, the Gardeners and Lannisters charged through a storm of arrows down unto their foes, sweeping aside the Targaryen spearmen, shattering their ranks. But by then, Aegon and his sisters were in the air. Aegon flew above the ranks of his foes upon Balerion, through a storm of spears and stones and arrows, swooping down repeatedly to bathe his foes in flame.
They were screaming as they charged, and then it turned into a different sort of screaming. I doubt, and you can see the things we were talking about with the planning here. They charged like screaming and excited, and then the dragons took the air. It says they waited for the charge to begin, which is like, yeah, they were waiting for closing the jaws of the trap. Make sure they're in charge, if they're fully charging before you light the flames behind them. Otherwise, because once the charge is going, it's not going to stop until it hits something. It's not just going to slow down. Like, actually, never mind. Let's ease down. Like, no, the dude in the front's not stopping. The dude behind him can't stop. No one can stop except the very end of the chart. Like the guys at the back, and if they stop, that doesn't even matter. It's lost any sorts of coordination. Once it's in full charge, it's kind of like a snowball or an avalanche. It's not going to stop till it collides with something. I doubt the stones and spears even got close. It says he flew through a storm of spears and stones and arrows. Like the spears, like I don't think those even got remotely close. The stones really didn't. The arrows, maybe. That's the only thing that could have even potentially gotten close. Like, he can keep his distance, right? The flames, like, he's not, like, hundreds of feet away, I don't think. But the flames have a bit of range to them, and he's up above. Like, how like, throwing a spear up? You got to be really strong. You got to be like Gregor Clegane, Olympic champion javelin thrower to do something like that. Real-life longbows. Let's get real for a second. Can penetrate plate mail at about 200 meters, but it isn't full penetration. That's just like they can stick in the plate but not go all the way through. So it wouldn't hurt. It would just like be annoying. It would slow you down a little bit if you had a bunch of those arrows sticking out of you. So if we were...
It might even hurt a little bit, but it's not going to like pierce your heart.
Right.
And often you might have some sort of cloth or leather underneath.
You're going to have layers. Yes, absolutely. You're not wearing plate mail against bare skin, that's for sure.
I am.
Oh, Shea is. Okay, Shea is. I did at Dragon Con with my...
Yeah, you are too. You're right. How was that? I was concerned
feeder.
for Aziz, and he's just like, it's fine. I don't care. I was like, it's going to be hot?
It was only on my shoulder, yeah. It was a little hot, but not that hot.
It was, okay.
So there's a misunderstanding about longbows. And I'm glad Herb Thompson brought up Agincourt, because there's a little bit of misunderstanding about Agincourt and longbows. Yes, longbows won the day at Agincourt, but there's a belief that these longbows were just killing the French knights by piercing their armor. That's not really what happened. The arrows were killing their horses and sticking in them a lot and slowing them down. So they had to get off their horses because their horses were getting shot down. And then they had to, which put them in the mud because it was muddy, which made them slog through the mud in their heavy army, which was getting worse and worse as they got filled with arrows, which some of them did do some damage. Some of them would find the gaps in the armor and wouldn't hit the plate, would hit like the legs or in the foot or wherever those spaces are. And they're also effective against lower quality plate mail. High quality, like the rich guy's armors, wouldn't be penetrated, but the lower quality plate mail, that would. You can pierce that with a longbow. So it's a lot more nuanced than these descriptions are. So again, bring that back to here. Balerion's armor's not getting pierced by longbows, y'all. And Aegon the Conqueror, best believe he had that high-quality steel armor. Visenya and Rhaenys, too. No doubt they had the best armor you could have. And I don't think they had Valyrian steel armor, but they did have the best steel you could make. So that's why there was only one slight wounding of one of them during this whole battle, which was an arrow to the shoulder, which was almost certainly an extremely lucky shot. Because, they were aiming for them, like, yeah, shoot down the dragon. No, they're trying to shoot the rider. Like, how are you going to kill that thing with an arrow? Like, it would defy all logic and intuition that you could kill that with an arrow. Like, Balerion, like, even 100 arrows. Like, no, it's silly. Like, it's like killing an elephant with needles, like how many needles would it take to kill I don't know that you could do it. There might not be enough needles. I don't know. So this is a big deal. This is how hard it is to hurt a dragon rider. Not to mention the wings flapping, those giant wings. We saw that. I had never conceived of that before. We saw it on House of the Dragon when Caraxes' wings were kind of this like naturally protecting Daemon from arrows just by flapping. They're just large, and it's a lot of space they're taking up when they're flapping. And Balerion's wings are all the larger. So really, when you put yourself in it and add all these details up, it just gets worse for the Reach in the West. Like, man, these dragons just so overwhelming. Apart from the weather, this was much different than prior engagements for Aegon too. Harrenhal was at night, right? That's a big factor there. He had torched some ships on a few occasions, but even he hadn't faced anything like this. He'd fought ships before, even well before this war, but nothing like this. But again, we can assume history came into play. Again, he would have read about engagements like this, and it's not exactly rocket science. There's certainly ways to maximally use each dive bomb, like getting maximum results, crowd control, all that stuff. And this burning of the field strategy that we're about to see unfold, that was probably had been done before. Nina points out the Rhoynar, 300 dragons deployed against them and Prince Garin and all that. There probably would have been strategy there. Aegon may have read about that. It wasn't just 300 dragons just randomly swooping down, and there must have been some organization to that. Wings, perhaps, like fighter planes or something like that. Groups of 5, groups of 10. Red leader to red squadron. They don't have the...
So this is like a choreographed dance of dragons?
Yes, real dances. Yes, that's right. And Aegon, of course, it's just common sense if you kill the leaders of an army, then the army might fall apart or lose its cohesion or start retreating. Yeah, so he was aiming to cut the head off the snake, so to speak, even though Balerion's more of the snake here and is more burning than cutting, but still, the metaphor still works. And Nina points out, it's just regular military logic. Killing the commanders of the other side is intuitive, right? That makes sense. It's been a thing forever, since pre-modern warfare. I mean, I'm talking modern in this sense, and as well as regular modern, our modern. Yeah,
it happens less in our modern warfare. It's like a new thing. Rank is kind of subdued and camouflaged on modern uniforms, because once you start to have like ranged weapons and snipers and planes or whatever, they can see, a big banner saying, "Here's the leader." Usually in the past, that would have meant, rally to me, look here for commands. But now it means the bad guys are going to drop artillery there.
Which is exactly what happened here.
Sniper's going to get you.
You're exactly right, Sean. That's the perfect analogy, because that's what happened. You got these very visible and large and loud white flags with green hands on them. Very prominently displayed at the middle of the vanguard and the middle of the center of these the 4 divisions of the army. Remember, vanguard, center, left, and right, right? So the center and the vanguard were led by gardeners, and they got and the Order of the Green Hand is in their midst as well, which have the same sigil. It's a white flag with green hand. For one time, the Order of the Green Hand's like, maybe we shouldn't look like the gardeners so much, because that's exactly what's getting targeted. So Aegon probably has a pretty easy time of like, right there, those guys. Like, okay, Balerion whispers in his ear, get those ones with the green hands. Just all the green hands, target those banners, leave the rest alone. Like, it's like a coloring book. Set those ones on fire. Don't go over the line. Color inside the lines of that, bathe it in flame. They marked it for him. They made his job easy. Like, again, this is why I said at the beginning, this is like the worst strategy they could have used for him. They put themselves in a fire trap, and they marked who to kill. like loudly and plainly. So it says he swooped down repeatedly, but we're saying he swooped down repeatedly at the green hand banners. Like, he wasn't just randomly here and there. Oh, I'll do one over here. Let's hit these guys. They haven't been hit yet. No, I think it was very precise. I think it was very organized, and he had a plan. And he wasn't, like, he had very little incentive to target the levies. He wants to target the leaders. And, like, why is he going after the peasants? Those are his, what's the point? Well, why would he do that?
Those are the people he wants to lead in the end, right? Exactly. He wants those people to go back home and tend their horses and their farms and have kids and pay taxes and be ready to defend against the Ironborn or all these other things. He doesn't want them dead. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it makes so much sense the way this plays out. He had plenty of incentive to target the gardeners and very little incentive to target anyone else. There would have been chaos in those front lines. At first, it would have been like, yeah, we're charging. Look at how small this target is. We got them. We smashed the Targaryen spearmen. Then, whoops, the dragons or just one dragon. As it says, Meraxes and Vhagar apparently didn't torch the armies at all. They only did the fire trick here that we're about to have a quote. So so let's imagine the center and the vanguard has charged. The center is charged behind them probably. The right and the left are still holding back a little bit, or maybe they charge afterwards. I don't know that all 55,000 men charged, but if so, there would still be some towards the back that would see what will be happening as the front part of the charge makes contact. They're probably cheering, just like those front guys were screaming in victory or in excitement or exaltation until things went bad. That first burst of flame would have really changed their outlook. They were like, whoa, that was bigger than I thought it would be, but meaning both the flame and the dragon. And then it's black. The flame is black. It's unnatural. It's like you're like, okay, I've never seen anything like that creature before. And that what's coming out of its mouth is unlike any flame I've ever seen before. And it's hotter than anything I've ever felt before. And oh God, what have we done? Right? And like you said, Sean, maybe they had hope that he can't just keep doing that. Like, he'll run out of flames, but nope. As it kept coming, they were like, uh-oh. And then it gets worse. As grim as that was, they didn't know how badly they had it until the queens played their part. Quote,
Rhaenys and Visenya set fires upwind of the enemy and behind them. The dry grasses and stands of wheat went up at once. The wind fanned the flames and blew the smoke into the faces of the advancing ranks of the two kings. The scent of fire sent their mounts into panic, and as the smoke thickened, horse and rider alike were blinded. Their ranks began to break as walls of fire rose on every side of them. Lord Mooton's men, safely upwind of the conflagration, waited with their bows and spears, and made short work of the burned and burning men, who came staggering from the inferno.
Which really shows how engineered and planned all this was before. They had men waiting to kill the ones emerging from the flames. They had preset a group of dudes to wait for that. And these were the same men that received the initial charge. A lot of them were, because Lord Mooton was one of the, as he says, he was one of the first to bend the knee, and he was given command of the ground forces. So this was very engineered. They were like, okay, they're going to charge at you. You're going to take the initial brunt. It's going to be difficult, but then we're going to emerge. Balerion's going to start raking their main lines while Meraxes and Vhagar do the encirclement with flames. The Mooton's men would have known where their exit would have been. Like, here's where you're going to exit the conflagration. We're going to have a kind of an area which will be defended by bows, so you'll be able to move through this while anyone coming after you will be able to pick off, and the dragons will be supporting that effort. All the men probably knew this. They may have been coached on it, and they probably would have been just like, this is exciting. Like, they may not have wanted to be there, but they were probably pretty happy with the way it was played out. They're probably like, yeah, we're going to win. We're going to beat these guys and then be able to experience victory and all that. So I really wonder, it's pretty clear what happened with the vanguard in the center. They would have been the brunt of it. I'm wondering about the other two elements of the army and whether they all charged or whether they held back a little, and how this affected the encirclement. Ultimately, it doesn't make a huge difference, but it is still a point of detail and curiosity that I have.
It's sort of like when you're at a stoplight with, 6 or 8 cars in front of you. You can see the light turn green, but you still can't go yet. The car in front of you hasn't gone.
Yeah.
It takes a minute for everyone to get moving.
That's a good analogy.
Those front couple cars charge. Then a dragon burns them up, and the last couple cars don't charge.
Yeah, the green and red really works there too, because you've got green for Gardner and go and the reach, and then no, stop, red flames. Yep. That works really well. That's a really good one. Yeah, you can't charge until only the person right in front of you is charged. Yeah, so it would take a while to get going, which is why they had to let it get going. Which is why they had to receive the charge.
More than the first couple cars to be coming.
Yeah, so you want to maximize.
And in my example of 6 or 8 cars, they would have had 40 cars, right?
Yeah.
Not this big. I don't know quite if every car represents 100 soldiers or whatever.
Yeah. And Nina says, let's consider like some of these soldiers that are on the winning side. They still might have nightmares, though. Even though they're on the winning side, they might have nightmares about all the screaming and trauma. They might not have taken a single wound, and it still might like affect them. They might still like there's plenty of veterans, real life veterans, who didn't take a wound but are traumatized by war, like their friend died. Maybe they didn't even see a friend die. It was still traumatizing because there's still human beings on the other side of that war that probably don't want to be there either, that didn't really have any choice in being there. Or maybe they thought they were fighting for a good cause because they've been misled, which kind of maybe is a lot of these gardeners. To them, it seems like a good cause. They're defending their lands. This is a foreign conqueror to them. This is some guy that just picked a fight for no good reason as far as they're concerned. And they're standing up for their kings that have been there for 8,000 years. That seems like a pretty in world. That seems like you're the good guys. We're the defenders of our territory. They don't know about Aegon's dream, if that's even relevant at this point, if Aegon even cared about that at this point, which I suspect he did, but he might have done all these things anyway. But they certainly don't know about it, regardless of what's in his head. So that's not going to be any balm for their burns afterwards if they survived. Like, oh, he had a good reason? Oh, gee, thanks. That'll happen in my lifetime, I'm sure. So Nina asked the question, how much did it bother them? How much did it bother the winners? Not just the soldiers, but like Aegon himself and the sisters. Were they bothered by this, or were they just so above the common folk, so superior thinking about themselves that it didn't, they're able to push that aside? They don't have sympathy for lesser humans or something like that? Or are they just that royal with their thinking that they can have that level of contempt for lesser life? I don't know. This is something that we don't know very well about Aegon. We don't know about Rhaenys. I kind of have my doubts about Visenya. We know a little more about her. I kind of doubt she was too concerned with this kind of thing. But maybe, it's possible. Maybe, there's the public persona isn't always what's behind the eyes, right? Like what's going on in your mind might be different than what you present the world. That's pretty common.
I think about a couple. I mean, I could have a million thoughts on this, but a couple that come to mind quickly are the movie Unforgiven. There's this young kid who's going to get the bad guys, and he finally catches one, kills him, and it's the first person you ever killed, and he's kind of sick to his stomach over it. Like, even though he, in his ostensibly at least, that was a bad guy, he still is not comfortable with having killed someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a Western that kind of challenged a lot of tropes. It was almost like a Martin style Western, where sort of sometimes they would have a hard time getting on a horse. It wouldn't hold still. Like everyone did just jump on a horse and ride off. The reality of some of the stuff was presented there, including what it's like to kill someone. And think about Robert McNamara in that documentary Fog of War, when he's kind of reflecting on. I was going to bring it up here anyway, because he came up. He was just this young Air Force. I think he was a lieutenant or something, but he was just tasked with trying to figure out how to most efficiently use the planes and bombs. And to him, it was like this math problem. Oh, and I figured it out. We just use incendiaries, and it'll burn all the oxygen in the air and kill everyone.
Yay!
So the Air Force said, okay, let's do it. And then they just killed everyone in Dresden and killed half the population of Tokyo, and just kept doing it every night, week after week, in Germany and Japan. And so this movie Fog of War is interviewing him, and he did a lot of other. He put seatbelts in cars, like he was responsible for that. He did a lot of great things through history. But there was this moment in this interview in the Fog of War where he's just reflecting like, yeah, I came up with firebombing, huh? I might not have been the pilot that dropped the bomb or the general that gave the order, but maybe someone else would have come up with it. But it's hard for him not to like think about the maybe literally a million people that died to that, you know? And so,
yeah, you wonder, like, does Aegon feel is like, he's like, well, I had to do it. It's like, that's how he justifies it in his mind,
Yeah.
I don't know.
He killed those 4,000 to save the other 4,000.
Yeah.
Killed those 4,000 to bring safety to the realm, stability to the realm. Like different ways he might justify it. Maybe just literally not think about it.
Maybe he has justified. Maybe the justifications help him, but he still has doubts. Like, well, maybe what if it was just a dream? What if I was wrong? Like, I don't know. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that had a lot of doubts, but that doesn't mean he had none.
Yeah.
And maybe he did have doubts. Maybe that's why he was kept so close to the chest, because he didn't want people to see his lack of confidence when he was so important to him. Project supreme confidence. He didn't want to show any cracks in that.
And maybe Aegon, who needs to be in this leadership role and has accepted the losses on the short term for the big scale, or maybe has a dream that he's trying to fulfill, some destiny. But what about that bowman? What about that bowman from the Crownlands who's just killing people who are screaming in flames? Like, how do they feel a week later, a year later,
Yeah. Or tell him, well, that guy was burning. I put him out of his misery. Like, he was...
Yeah,
like,
maybe that's one way you rationalize it, or just maybe it's a good way even to rationalize or justify it. I don't know.
I don't know what I would tell myself if I was in that spot. Another interesting thing about this, too, is like, yeah, maybe it looks a little less chivalrous. Maybe it's not quite as honorable. Maybe that's why the trap nature of it all was downplayed by the sources. Nina points out a great parallel. Orys beat King Argilac in one-on-one combat. That looks really honorable. And we put out in our episode on Battle Last Storm a lot of suggestions that this maybe didn't go quite so smoothly. Maybe it was a little like, after the battle, they dressed it up a little to make it seem a little more even, a little more noble on Orys' side. Argilac had been thrown from his horse and fighting all day. Like, he probably had been wounded already. Like, was he really? He wasn't at full strength. He's a lot older. Like, so it really wasn't that even. But the sources kind of make it seem a little more even and make it seem more noble, which is like, yeah, they would do that. That's the winners that they're writing about. So the same thing here. Like, downplaying the level of subterfuge and cunning that was used, but also but there's no portraying this as Aegon beat Mern one-on-one in a fair fight. You can't sell that. The period. Like, there's no version of that works. They wouldn't even try that. So does anyone like look at that little side eye like, yeah, this was kind of unchivalrous. This wasn't a fair fight. Yes, like, we have to bend the knee to this guy because he has his big ass dragon. What else can we do? But I don't know. It doesn't. In some ways, it doesn't fit into the codes of chivalry, which are important in Westeros. I know that these things can be convenient. Like, chivalry is often just forgotten for expedience, and this could easily be one of those times. But I think it's a fair thing to bring up, and like, some people might have rankled the way that this was done because it was flames and dragons and not two enemies meeting on the field of battle to see who's stronger. There's all unnatural, supernatural elements which will later be complained about by the faith. Will say, the incest, these monstrous dragons, this stuff is unnatural. It's not of the seven. We shouldn't guess that those attitudes only came after they were beaten by the dragons. I think some of that probably started before.
I like those points, but a couple, counterpoints. That might have made it all the more important for Aegon to do this. He's like, I don't care if you beat me one-on-one. That's not what's happening here. Okay. I'm coming with my dragons. You better kneel. Right?
Yeah.
That's part of what he's trying to prove. This point here is like, sure, Orys and Argilac, they can do whatever, but I would have gone over there with my dragons if Orys hadn't won. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to win, And furthermore, it makes it all the more important for Aegon to do what he did, is be chivalrous otherwise. When he does win, okay, you bent the knee. Now go back to your castle and serve me. I'm not going to continue to maybe in this battle it was unfair, but I'm going to be fair afterwards.
Okay, yeah, I like that. That's a good point. Like, it makes all the reason to be more chivalrous outside of the battlefield if there's any doubt on it. That's a great point. And we'll see in a couple of cases, Aegon does fight people hand to hand at least a couple times. I don't think it's happened yet, but it will happen. So that might be part of why, to counteract an image that was gained here at the Field of Fire. Like, okay, I'm going to balance this out with some victories with Blackfire. Take out a few people in one-on-one duels just to prove that, hey, I am dangerous without my... It's not all the dragon. Yes, the dragon is important, but I'm a good warrior too. And
it's not all the dragon. It's 99%.
Yeah, right?
Not all the dragon.
So returning to Nina's point about feeling conflicted and using this as a parallel to nuclear weapons, which is something that's come up several times in the fandom over the years. Nina's done it before. I think we've done it before. That it's a reasonable parallel. It's back in current thinking, I suppose, because of movies like Oppenheimer. Well, that one in particular. But it's come up before. And George grew up during the nuclear panic era, when nukes were new and nobody knew like whether people would be able to hold back. Like, oh, should humanity really have those? It's kind of a bad thing to be out there. Yeah, they're not wrong. Like, if one of those falls in the hands of the wrong person, yeah, like someone who's unstable. Like, imagine, like, look what happens when Maegor gets a dragon. Like, he goes around and just destroys things. I mean, heck, even these sane Targaryens level that kind of destruction on Dorne. So it's Nina suggests maybe George wanted some readers to at least think about those parallels, or at least have the potential to notice them if they come up. Maybe not as direct, but maybe the ability to unleash total destruction is maybe itself an unethical thing. Just using it, having the ability to use it as a deterrent is one thing, but actually using it is something else. So it's an interesting thing to ponder in the modern world, but also to apply it to their world and try to use their sense of ethics and how that might have applied. All right, so as we said, the battle itself there's not much else to say about the actual battle. The men were surrounded by flames. A lot of them were burned. A lot of them were killed, but maybe not as many as we might think. Here is the full aftermath quote.
The Field of Fire, the battle was named afterward. More than 4,000 men died in the flames. Another 1,000 perished by sword and spear and arrow. Tens of thousands suffered burns, some so bad that they would remain scarred for life. King Mern IX was amongst the dead, together with his sons, grandsons, brothers, cousins, and other kin. One nephew survived for 3 days. When he died of his burns, House Gardner died with him. King Loren of the Rock lived, riding through a wall of flame and smoke to safety when he saw the battle lost. The Targaryens lost fewer than 100 men. Queen Visenya took an arrow in one shoulder, but soon recovered. As the dragons gorged themselves on the dead, Aegon commanded that the swords of the slain be gathered up and sent downriver.
4,000 men dead, which is a huge number of people, but not a big percentage of the army. So that's 7,000 dead to Dragonflame, and then, or 7% dead to Dragonflame, and then another 1,000 killed by swords and arrows and spears. So, it's only about 8%, 9% of the whole forces that were on the field there. So low casualties isn't unusual in ancient battles. That's actually fairly normal, but this isn't even necessarily a low amount of casualties in that side. But it is a low percentage to have wiped out all the gardeners. Given that all the gardeners were wiped out, it's a kind of a low percentage. So, which really emphasizes what we were saying about them being targeted. All those banners and everything. Sean?
It's also a huge ratio of losses on one side to the other.
Yes,
right?
Yes. Very true. Now
40-1 or something. When the side that lost 40-1 had outnumbered the other side 5-1, that's an incredibly lopsided casualty number.
Now Anita points out this is probably a little narrative economy on here. It's kind of hard to imagine there were no Gardner cousins just elsewhere. Like all of them were on the battlefield. That's a little hard to swallow.
And no nephew or wife or daughter back home.
Well, the wives will account for separately, but yes, still even that. Yeah, like both of the grandsons were old enough to be on the field of battle, but no grandsons that weren't. It's like, yeah. So it is kind of convenient, but that's fine. It's not unrealistic, but it's definitely like maybe a little bit of author thumb on the scale there. It's maybe a little unrealistic, but still, we can write in some more here. We can believe that there were other cousins out there that the Tyrells went and did something to. They're like, well, if we want to hold on to power, we better get rid of these other gardeners. And it's just not written in the history books that way because it looks bad. It's the same thing. Like, oh, so all the gardeners were hunted down and killed afterwards? That looks that's not the kind of realm Aegon's trying to, be perceived as running. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want to be the guy who's executing people in front. He wants people to bow to him because he's strong, not to bow to him because, or else,
It's tyrannical.
Yes. Yeah. That's the Maegor that comes later. Maegor does those things later. He didn't learn that subtlety. He didn't learn those differences.
I can imagine there being some gardeners out there that are like, actually, my last name is Flower. Let's just avoid this whole conflict.
Yeah, I'm a bastard. No, really. My mom and dad were not married.
I escaped the castle with some silver, and I've got enough to buy a horse, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Now, Nina points out how this has happened in other places, too. Like, George has in the past been a little bit dismissive about the potential for other Starks being around. He's like, yeah, there's probably some Stark cousins in the north somewhere. But that's all, that's it. It would be hard for it to be otherwise, considering, the bloodlines don't just vanish, like this, their Stark cousins married into these other houses long ago. That bloodline has to still exist somehow, even if it's been kind of forgotten because it's been hundreds of years. But yeah, there's like Tully's and Aaron. She says the same thing kind of happens. It's just, yeah, there would probably be some other examples out there. But on the other hand, if we're pointing it that way, the Gardeners really did put themselves in the thick of it. They were, the Gardeners were all piled into the two frontal positions and charged right at Balerion, or charged right at the army, which is in Balerion. And advertised themselves. So there is, that's part of why it's at least somewhat believable. And
I can also believe they even brought 7-year-olds with them too. I can believe
that's true. Yeah, you want them to see it.
Naive and confident enough that they would have brought them just to be part of the adventure. Yeah. Just Ned. How old was Bran when Ned brought him to see the head be chopped off?
Yeah, 7. Yeah, 7 years old. Yeah, you're right. And you're not wrong. 8 and 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds are occasionally in battle. Yeah, like Aegon and Aemon Blackfire died at the Redgrass Field. They were Daemon's squires. They were like, what, 11, 12, maybe 13? Yeah. 13's getting into the range of less crazy, but still, that is really young to be in battle. Jeez.
Yeah.
And so they stuck together in battle, which is normal for houses like they do. They, like you said, you have your banner so you know where your people are, which backfires in a spot like this when there's targeting and weaponry that can pick that out, which is also what happened. So it was yet another example of why this was a horrible strategic error by the army of the two kings. So many of these things that were very normal for them were huge disadvantages. Another one that was wiped out, Lord Armand Peake. The Peakes weren't wiped out entirely, but Lord Armand Peake and all of his sons were killed. So it was like a cousin that inherited here. So there was none of this writing off the cousins for the Peakes, but they were for the Gardeners. But again, no one would probably hunt down and kill the extra Peakes, except maybe other Peakes that wanted to make sure that they got it all for themselves. The entire Order of the Green Hand was wiped out. That makes more sense to me because they're a martial order. They would all be on the battlefield. There might be like some scribes and retired guys, but like those dudes would have just died out. It's not like your sons don't join the order automatically. It's not like it's not a hereditary thing.
There wouldn't have been enough left over to maintain the order anymore, even if some random people survived.
And technically, the Manderleys still say it exists, and it's them. They still claim membership in there. They had already gone north well before this battle. Lucky for them. They're like, ooh, another reason why we're glad we're up in the north. We would have been on the field of fire right there with them. And our little greenish mermaid might look a little too much like a green hand from a distance. So that's a good thing. Like, yep, woof, woo. Yeah, we dodged I would say a bullet, but a burst of flame.
Fire bullet.
Yeah, fire blast. As for the rest, so the survivors we're talking about, when I say the rest, all those permanent burn scars, tens of thousands it says, had burn scars. That's a way to keep the memory alive for generations. That's a way to prove, if you're one of those dudes at the bar claiming to have been there, that's one way to kind of back your tail up, that you're like, I look up the burns to prove I was there. Like, do these look like normal burns to you? No, those are dragonfire burns. I took a direct hit from Balerion on my arm. That's why my arm doesn't look right, 30,000 in total surrendered. So with 4,000 killed by flame and 1,000 killed by conventional weapons, that means as many as 20,000 got away, because 55,000 on the battlefield and 30,000 surrendered. So that's a lot who got away. And the ones who didn't get away were added to Aegon's army, which immediately marched north to confront Torrhen, which we'll be discussing next time. So yeah, look at that. It's very common for real-life sources to under-report their losses. This might be one of those times. 100 deaths for the Targaryens is all that's reported, and an arrow in the shoulder for Visenya. But it's possible. It might actually be that small. I can kind of believe it. I feel like it was probably more than that, because that big old Iron Fist did smash into their front lines. And then the dragons started coming down. So that initial charge, I feel like that alone could have taken out more than 100. But maybe not. Maybe not. You know. Talk about a bunch of swords for the Iron Throne. Right? That's a lot of swords. A whole bunch melted Gardener swords, some nice swords, some Gardener swords and all that. Now, remember how I was talking about how I'm not sure the right and left had time to fully charge because of the size of the center and the vanguard and how long it would take them to get going and in full strength, like using your stoplight analogy. And again, King Loren got away. So that maybe kind of does imply that he saw the battle was lost and rode away. He was the commander of the right. Or the left, I forget. It doesn't matter. He got away, perhaps because his division never fully engaged, which would make sense, because 2 divisions engaged with 11,000 men. That's half of a 55,000 man army. That's 22,000 men already. You can see why Aegon's like, okay, we got to do this now before our 11,000 are completely overwhelmed. And by that time, King Loren has not yet charged. And yeah. That could explain it. That could also explain why there's no mention at all of what happened to the 4th division. They might have gotten away mostly intact, which that could account for a lot of the 20,000 men who got away. But that's about right. If you think about the math, divide the 55,000 in fourths. That's about what? 14, almost 15, or almost 16,000 per division. So that would be. Not 64, my bad. So 13, yeah. 13,000.
13.
So close to like 13 and a half, almost exactly 13,500 per fourth. So if one and a half of those fourths got away, that's roughly 20,000. So the roughly 2/3 each of the left and the right got away, something like that. Anyway, that's not an important thing to figure out, but you know, we like to get into the weeds with those numbers and those casualties and army sizes. So the rest, yeah, that's just a gruesome feast too. You hear about the dragons gorging themselves on the burned dead. You know, we know that dragons like their meat well cooked, well burned. There'd be plenty of that. But that's just gruesome to think about and would intimidate the survivors even more. Like just sitting there watching the dragons just eat the dead, like as if they weren't intimidated enough. It's like, as if they didn't see those creatures as unnatural enough to be like, yeah. Because animals don't eat cooked meat. Like that's not normal. Even that is unnatural. Like, we're the only animals that eat cooked meat. I never really thought about that before. Dragons, I think it's even mentioned in the books, only humans and dragons eat cooked meat. Yeah.
There's some exceptions. Animals that we've domesticated, dogs would eat.
Oh, I mean, they don't prepare it that way. I'm sorry, they don't look to eat.
Right,
yes,
yeah.
You're, of course, right, that they will eat it.
It's not part of their natural diet, for sure.
They'll happily, yeah. Like, our cats will, absolutely. You put cooked meat in front of them, yeah, they'll go for it. But the crows would show up eventually, too, because the dragons can't possibly eat all that themselves. Maybe the wolves and the wild dogs, and it gets kind of gross. But as to the lions...
The worms.
The worms, yes, absolutely. The worms and the worms, with the Y and the O, would be feasting. The big and the small. So, as we said, the Lannisters got away. So, as the wolves and crows and dragons were feasting, well, let's have a quote about what happened next.
Loren Lannister was captured the next day. The King of the Rock laid his sword and crown at Aegon's feet, bent the knee, and did him homage. And Aegon, true to his promises, lifted his beaten foe back to his feet and confirmed him in his lands and lordship, naming him Lord of Castle Rock and Warden of the West. Lord Loren's bannermen followed his example, and so too did many lords of the Reach, those who had survived the Dragonfire.
No description of how this happened, but it's pretty easy to imagine. I mean, the dragon would be faster, you'd be able to find them, and they'd be in disarray, but it would be important. Like, as we said, you don't want them to get back to Castle Rock. You really do not want them to get inside and hole up. You want to stop them before they arrive. So it probably would have been a pretty big sense of urgency. Maybe not as much as I'm imagining. Maybe they don't realize how bad Castle Rock was, but I think they did, because there's one of those anecdotes about Aegon having visited certain parts of of Westeros before the conquest, includes him going to Lannisport, which means he would see Casterly Rock because it's right there. In fact, it's likely he went inside, given if he visited the Lannisters, they would probably have him inside, but who knows? Still, he would have seen it.
I can imagine it being an organized surrender, that he, quote unquote, got away and then assessed the situation. Like, all right, well, now what? The army's defeated. They've got these dragons.
They beat the Reach. They beat everywhere else.
They might burn me alive as I try to run back to Casterly Rock. And then when I get back, I think he might have decided I need to just surrender now. And he might have sent an envoy. And I think it might sound a little better to both sides too if he was captured rather than he surrendered. It's not for him. That sounds better. They got me. I had no choice.
That's a good point.
And to the Targaryens, it might sound better too, that like, we got him, we captured him, rather than it might have been an arranged surrender. I'm not sure.
I can see that. Yeah,
how it might have played out.
The optics are a little better there. Another factor is that it's a pretty good way back. Like it would have taken a little while to get back to Casterly Rock. It's not that close. They had marched a substantial way. I mean, they were in the west. I mean, they were not in the west. They were in the Reach. They had to march all the way through the west. Casterly Rock's basically at the shore, so plenty of time to be caught. Which emphasizes what you're saying. Like, yeah, we may not be able to get away. All the more reason to maybe surrender. Yeah, like you said, he may just torch us if he's flying. If his dragon gets here, but his army is 2 days behind, he might just decide to use his dragon, and we don't need any more of that. We don't need any more of that. We're done with that. We're done with being strafed by unnaturally hot black fire. We've had once was enough. Nina points out, as she is wont to do, an example from the Accursed Kings, which is also an example from history in this case, because Accursed Kings is historical fiction. The retreating, defeated Philip VI of France, following the Battle of Crécy, wandering the countryside with a handful of men, knocking at the door of a manor house with the words, "Open to the unhappy King of France," which is, I believe, a historical anecdote, as well as something that I think Maurice Druon put into the books. I could be wrong about that. Nina will surely correct me later if I'm wrong. So, Nina, let me know if I'm wrong about that one. Yeah, I like what you said about the surrender potentially. Nina offers another potential that maybe not. It doesn't necessarily look better to say you surrendered, but or to say you were caught, but because it might look cowardly. But it's hard to say. It's difficult to put us on our place, and you already look bad because you lost. So what makes you look a little bit less bad? You know, does it look bad to say you surrendered, or after you got away, or does it look better to say you were captured? Yeah, I'm not actually sure. Nina isn't sure either. So yeah, it's a fair point to put in dispute. Even now, they would have beaten Casterly Rock eventually. I'm sure of it, but it would have been a nasty business, long and ugly and slow, and yeah. And like you say, Sean, they got better other things to do. It might
not have been worth it.
Yeah.
Right. They might have been able to capture Casterly Rock at the expense of losing the Crownlands of the North, or never even starting on Dorne. Like, they might have spent the time and having all those dragons. They could probably contain Casterly Rock. They could just burn flames into entrances and keep food from going in or out. But while they're doing that, who's monitoring the Iron Islands ships going over to the Crownlands, or pirates attacking Dragonstone, or whatever else? They need the dragons for other things.
Yes.
And never mind their armies that they would then have to feed as they siege Casterly Rock. And I think that they could have done it, but they might have said, never mind, we'll come back to this, kind of like Dorne.
Mm-hmm.
We need the dragons for all these other missions.
Yeah.
And it might have dragged out. They might have, even if they theoretically could have, the reality is they might not have been able to, at least not for a long time, kind of like Dorne.
Another good angle Nina points out here is that Aegon had proved himself willing to give territory to take the top spot away from someone and give it to someone else. He gave the Tullys the Riverlands. He gave Orys Baratheon the Stormlands. At this point, the Tyrells hadn't been given Highgarden yet, but that was about to happen. So Loren may have realized that. He may have another reason I should surrender is that if I don't, he might give Casterly Rock to someone else. He might give it to the Rains or the Marbrands or someone.
He could have flown his dragon back to Castle Rock, which would have almost no forces now because they all just left, right? And said, all right, we just defeated your king and your armies, and here we are with 3 dragons. And just like the Tyrells, whoever's there might have just bent the knee and said, all right,
it's yours. Yeah, and he would have raised them up to say, totally. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So to make sure he got to keep Castle Rock, he might have been like, I better surrender, because Aegon he does tend to lift up those.
Reward me for surrendering like he has done with everyone else, and he will punish me for not surrendering like he does with everyone else.
Yeah, they may have set in as he's running away from the battlefield in panic. Once he gets away and starts thinking about it, he's like, yep, better bend the knee. Like, he hates to admit it, but the more he turns it over in his head, he may have advisors telling him the same thing, or his advisors might be telling him to just fight on or something, or don't give up hope, but he's like, nah, dog, we gotta give up. It's the best move at this point. And he was right. He now bent the knee. The West bent the knee with him. They're still his liege lord, so they don't have Castle Rock to retreat to. It's not like they don't have castles inside mountains. They don't have infinite wealth inside that mountain. They can't hold out, and it's dishonorable. Their king bent the knee. They're supposed to as well. It's kind of how you're supposed to. You followed your lord when he called you to battle, and when he bends the knee, you do too. So, yeah. There are a couple that could have hidden out. There are some of them that have castles in mountains, like the Rains, but Tywin was able to destroy them.
What are you doing? What are you hiding out for? What do you think's going to happen? Like, finally, after years of being sieged, you'll come out and be in charge?
Things will have gone back to before. Like, the dragons will have died out. Yeah, good thing we waited out that Targaryen generation, that one decade. Yeah. You fools that went along with it. Yeah, you should have hidden under. This was extremely different from what happened to the allies. Every single male gardener wiped out. We don't hear of any Lannister deaths. Not one, because according to Tyrion, King Lorne shortly after hadn't had a son yet. There were no sons born to him. They lost soldiers, but not any actual Lannisters, which is interesting, which even more implies that the Lannisters never really got into the thick of the fighting because of where they were on the battlefield, and they retreated before they were caught in the full trap of fire. Because there's so many Lannisters. There's always a lot of Lannisters, right? There's always, maybe the ones that were killed just weren't relevant, so they didn't get mentioned. Like, a couple cousins aren't worth historical mention. Like someone that's 25 spots away from the succession doesn't bear mention unless he's the only one left, or unless all of them were wiped out. So yeah. So there was no disruption at all in their dynastic line that we hear of, which is obviously very different than the elsewhere. It's kind of similar to what happened in the Vale. The Vale also saw no disruption at all. They're like, before it got to their armies dying, only their ships had died. They're like, yep, we bend the knee. Our young king becomes a young lord. Everyone else stays exactly where they were in the line of succession. The same people are in charge. Their title just isn't quite as fancy. And you get a new title, though. Both the Vale and the West got new titles. They got this Warden of the East and West. Those were new dynamics. So you go from king to warden. You still get to be a high lord. So there's still these new titles that get created. They still have some fanciness to them. This would not be the case in the Reach, however. So we went long on this, so I think we'll call it here. We'll get back to Highgarden and the examples of the Field of Fire, the lessons. We'll come to that next time, because a lot of these things are related to what we'll talk about next time, which is the other kingdoms that handle this a bit differently. There isn't a single more large battle left in the conquest. There's lots of small ones. There's lots of burnings. There's lots of castles and guerrilla warfare. But things are moving into a different phase now. So we had a good point of flexibility here. We could have either, if we had gotten through this other stuff a little faster, we could have pushed our way through all of this. But we've got more than 5 pages left here, like 6 pages left of our notes here. And if it took us 2 hours and 10 minutes to get through 14 pages. This probably another hour of this. So we're not going to push a 3-hour episode, and we're not going to do part of this. We'll save it off to bite off all at once. So let's do a few other things before we end the episode. One thing to look forward to here is all these great quotes we'll start next time with. We'll go through the Field of Fire's examples in Westeros in current times. That includes more quotes by Tyrion, a quote by, who else do we have? Olenna Tyrell, and a quote from Daenerys and Barristan. Lots of good stuff. And of course, the Sworn Sword. It comes up in the Sworn Sword a few times. We also get a look at what it might look like, a microcosm, because of the burning that happened during the Sworn Sword. So, before any of these shakeups could begin in earnest, before Highgarden was settled, before Hightower bent the knee, before the Iron Islands and all that, the North, Dorne, a lot of places still unsubdued, even though we aren't going to see another large battle. There's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of coverage for us to get through, a lot of fun stuff to talk about. Lesser problems like the Three Sisters, who were still aiming for independence, who at this point were still holding on to that. No one had confronted them directly yet, but that will come. We actually won't have an episode next week. We'll probably put up a rerun, but we'll be back where we left off on the 22nd of October. And let's discuss the trivia question.
I'll say why we're off.
Okay, yeah,
week.
go ahead.
Every year I forget to plan for Atlanta Pride. We celebrate Pride in October, not June like the rest of the country for the most part. So we have the Pride Festival here, and every year we stream on Sunday, so I can't go on Sunday. I only go on Saturday. But I thought ahead, and I asked for it off this year so that I could actually experience all of the Pride Festival. It's just a free festival here. So that's
Atlanta
why.
Pride goes hard. I mean,
Yeah.
Atlanta's a hub. So
Yeah. There's all sorts of musicians and a parade. And anyways, I'm quite excited to experience both days of it this year.
Right.
I think I read somewhere, I don't know quite how they measure this, but it was the third biggest Pride celebration. I think New York and San Francisco are 1 and 2, and Atlanta's number 3.
Checks
Nice.
out. That makes sense to me personally. It does. And yeah, it's great that we have it in October because June in Atlanta be miserable outside. October, the weather's beautiful. So yeah. Anyways, if you were wondering why we were off, I thought I'd let you know it was for me.
Yeah, for a share.
Only because you're the best.
You can't not give the best a weekend off when they ask for it. I mean, hell, that's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable. So, trivia question. The question, this is very funny because we really re-emphasized the answer when Shot said the name
accidentally
wrong.
featured
Oakenheart.
Yeah.
Oakenheart.
People like that. People
Oakenheart.
then were like, Oakenheart was my guest. Yeah, people. Z said he wanted to have the trivia question, have the answer in the episode sometimes or going forward or whatever.
Yep.
And yeah, people seem to like that.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll keep that going then. I think it's a good way to do it. Have the answer be in there because it just feels a little.
There'll be
more.
some people who just know it, like when we first asked.
Because they'll have just
No,
read
you
it, which kind of fits in with what we're going to do.
I shared this tidbit because we did our trivia game. We hosted trivia for patrons, and if you wanted to see how that went, you could watch on the Facebook page. We streamed it. But anyways, when preparing the trivia questions, I had to ask because he doesn't write the answers to the questions in the documents. So the questions are not there, the answers are not there. So I had to ask Aziz, well, what's the answer to this? And there were multiple questions he did not know.
He
did not. He stumped himself.
A good fourth or fifth of them.
Yeah, a
like,
good fourth or fifth of the questions
a good
Aziz
chunk.
didn't know. So
you read me like 20 or 25, and like if it was 20, I got 15.
Yeah. Every time
like,
Aziz didn't know one, I was like, yes, good.
So now I put the answer in the document. So Shay, because there's been times where Shay is like looking to see who got the answer right. And she didn't know because she didn't know the answer
Yeah, so
because I didn't put it in
don't know
there.
Who got the answer right on that one at all? Sorry, y'all.
Yeah, whoops. Okay, that's my bad. But that's
Incidentally, if we're ready to announce this, we're gonna do trivia again on the 28th, right?
Yes, we should say it now. Yeah, we're gonna do. Well, I'll make a post and I'll tag people on Discord and whatnot. But if you're listening now, you can plan now ahead. We're gonna do it Saturday, October 28th at 3 p.m. This way, hopefully, some of you who are in Europe can make it work. We're just trying a variety of days and times, and we'll look back at our logs over time and figure out what was most popular. And if you want us to keep doing things like this, you should show up because it's not for sure that we'll keep doing it for longer than 6 months or
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Participation will absolutely keep it going no matter what. All right. So a couple other odds and ends here. If you are wanting to stay immersed, check out our episode on the Age of Heroes, or our episode on Highgarden, or perhaps our episode The Last Storm, which is for patrons and members only. There's 3 main ways to get access to all of our bonus episodes. The Last Storm is simply the most recent of our subscribers only episodes. The 3 ways to get it are become a patron, become a Spotify subscriber, which there should be a link. If you listen on Spotify, there should be a link in the description of the episode. Or you can send us a one-time donation through PayPal. There's a link on our website. And if you send us a donation through that, I will send you a link to all of our bonus episodes. So
there is a 4th way.
Is there?
You can have sex with Melisandre.
Okay, there is a 4th way. I don't know how you would prove you did that.
Oh, you'll know.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. We'll take each one of those in a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Yes, and we'll keep that in the shadows. Keep that in the shadow, baby. Yeah. Yeah, so that's how you get the Last Storm episode. That's how you get all our other patrons episodes. It's a long list now. I couldn't possibly read them all off. So you get a lot of bang for your buck these days with a membership to History of Westeros. But you needn't do so if you don't want to. We have a large back catalog as well, so plenty of ways to enjoy our show for
we're
free.
saying that plenty of people sign up and they're like, I'm going to sign up for 6 months, or I'm going to sign up at $5 until I've given $60. It doesn't have to be forever.
That is a way a lot of people do it. Yeah. I do that. I can't support all the shows I want to support, so I will support some of them for 6 months to a year and then move on to the next one and then maybe circle back when I can. But yeah, like I can only do a certain amount. I can't afford to be a patron of every single thing I enjoy. A lot of y'all can't probably either. But I think it's a pretty good way to do it, is to move it around from time to time, and that way you hit everyone that you're supporting with at least a little bit of love, a little bit of backing.
That's the best way to support other people, but for us, it needs to be forever.
Or else.
I think it's such an option.
The field of fire will come from you.
I think it's a great option to exist in a world that we're not depending on Coca-Cola to give us a spot Thursday nights at 8 or whatever. Just people who like us can support us. You don't need to do it through an advertiser. So.
You're right. I mean, we take whatever
we'll take advertisers.
It allows us to turn down sponsors. Like, we would be in a weird spot where we can't turn sponsors down. We can occasionally. Like, it's hard to, because we're not rolling in the dough here. But yeah. It does give us a little more flexibility as creators. We're not beholden to just whoever has money, which is kind of how a lot of art and creativity has worked throughout most of human existence. It's like, well, if either I take this money or it's not getting done, and a lot of conundrums that come between that. Yes, that's how it works. Cool. Yeah, so we definitely appreciate those of you who have taken that step, but there's lots of other ways to support us. Telling your friends is one of the best ways there is. One of the best, probably the best non-financial way to support. But we appreciate whatever way your support comes. We're very lucky to be able to do this, and we will not cease being thankful. So thank you as well to the people who support us outside of our listeners. Nina as well, who's also a listener, but her support as a co-writer is invaluable. Check out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. Joey, Jesse, and Bran giving us great help with the intro, outro, our music. Same goes for Michael Klarfeld, his excellent help with the maps. Go to claradox.com or claradox.de, excuse me, that's Claradox.de. You can buy the files and then go print the maps yourself. And that includes a lot of maps that you may not have even seen through us, because he's done a few. Also, thanks to our Bengineer, and thanks to my excellent co-hosts and our Facebook mods. Haven't shouted y'all out in a bit, but you deserve that mention. It's a lot of work, modding groups or forums and things like that. A lot of work goes in that y'all might not be aware of, unless you've done it before, in which case you're very aware of it and probably feel the same way as how I'm describing it right now. So until next time, everybody, this was a great episode. I had a lot of fun discussing this huge episode of A Song of Ice and Fire history. As we pointed out at the beginning, it appears right at the start in Tyrion's second chapter, and we'll have more to say about it next time. You know what to do in the meantime. Valar reread us.